Story 1.
I still check the locks 3 times before I go to bed. Every single night. My therapist says that's normal, that it'll fade. But it's been 8 months and I don't think she's right about that. Let me tell you about the worst weekend of my life. My girlfriend Nadia and I had been together 2 years. I wanted to do something special. Not a ring, not yet, but something that said I was serious. So I booked this lake house up in the Catskills, a place called Heron's Rest. You've probably seen listings like it exposed beams, a dock with Adirondack chairs, fog rolling off the water at dawn. The photos look like a cologne ad. And the host, a guy named Martin, had 112 5-star reviews. People called him the best host on the platform. One review literally said, "Martin thinks of everything before you even know you need it." I remember reading that and thinking how lucky we were to snag the place. Now it makes my skin crawl. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in October. Martin met us at the door, mid-50s, wire-rimmed glasses, soft handshake. He gave us a tour, showed us the French press, the record player, the outdoor shower, told us the Wi-Fi password was taped inside the kitchen cabinet. He was warm but not overbearing, just the right amount of charming. When he left, Nadia turned to me and said, "Okay, this is perfect." And it was, for about 36 hours. Saturday morning, Nadia was unpacking her toiletry bag and she stopped. She looked at her open suitcase on the luggage rack and tilted her head the way she does when something's off. "Did you move my stuff?" she asked. I hadn't touched it. She shrugged it off. Maybe she'd just forgotten how she'd packed it. We spent the day on the water, cooked dinner together, drank wine on the dock. It was everything I'd planned. Sunday morning it happened again. This time she was more specific. Her sweaters had been refolded. Not just shifted, refolded. The edges were crisp, almost military. Nadia doesn't fold like that. Neither do I. I told her maybe the suitcase shifted when we bumped it getting into bed. She gave me a look but let it go. Monday morning, our last full day, she didn't let it go. She pulled me into the bathroom, turned the faucet on full blast and whispered, "Someone has been in my suitcase." 3 days in a row. My underwear is in a different order, Jake. I am not imagining this. The faucet. She turned on the faucet because she didn't want to be heard. That detail still haunts me because it means some part of her already knew. I wanted to be the rational one. I wanted to calm her down. But the look in her eyes wasn't paranoia, it was fear that I wouldn't believe her. So I did something simple. I took a photo of her suitcase with my phone. Every item exactly as it was, time-stamped. Then we left for the day, made sure every window was latched, and locked the front door behind us. When we came back 4 hours later, the door was still locked. The windows were still latched. But the suitcase was different. I compared the photos side by side. A silk scarf had been moved from the left pocket to the right. A pair of earrings was now sitting on top of a shirt instead of inside a zippered pouch. Subtle changes, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. But we were looking now. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the sickening realization that someone had been inside the house while we were gone and they had a way in that we couldn't see. I called Martin, told him we thought someone might have broken in. His voice was so calm it was almost sedative. "Oh no, that's terrible," he said. "But I assure you the property is completely secure. There's only one key, and you have it. Are you sure nothing was left unlocked?" He offered to come check on us. I said no. Nadia was shaking her head violently behind me. "No, do not let him come here." I called the local police. A deputy came out, walked through the house, checked the doors and windows. Found nothing. No signs of forced entry. He looked at us the way you look at city people who hear a raccoon and think it's a murderer. He said, "Folks, these old houses settle. Things shift. I wouldn't worry about it." After he left, Nadia sat on the bed and said very quietly, "We need to search this house, every inch." We started in the basement. Martin had told us during the tour that it was just storage, old furniture, holiday decorations, nothing interesting. There was a door at the bottom of the stairs, and behind it was exactly what he described. Dusty shelves. Boxes. A dehumidifier humming in the corner. But Nadia noticed the wall. The back wall was drywall, painted the same off-white as the rest of the basement, except there was a seam. Not obvious, you'd have to be looking. A vertical line running floor to ceiling about 3 feet from the corner, where the paint was, just slightly newer, slightly smoother. I pushed on it. Nothing. I pushed harder and the bottom edge gave way about a 1/4 inch. There was a magnetic latch behind the drywall. I pried it with a butter knife from the kitchen. The panel swung inward on hidden hinges, and behind it was a room. A room where someone was living? There was a cot with a sleeping bag, a mini fridge stocked with food, a laptop on a folding table, clothes hanging from a pipe along the ceiling, and on the laptop screen, 4 camera feeds: our bedroom, the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom. Live feeds. I could see our suitcases on the bedroom camera. I could see the butter knife I'd left on the kitchen counter. Nadia made a sound I'd never heard from her before. Not a scream, more like the air leaving her body all at once. I took photos. I took video. I filmed the cameras, the cot, the concealed door, everything. My hands were shaking so badly, the footage is almost unwatchable, but it's there. Then we grabbed our bags and ran to the car. I called 911 from the driveway. And here's where it gets worse. By the time the police arrived, a different deputy this time, plus a sergeant, we went back down to show them the room. The panel was sealed shut. Smooth, no seam visible. The butter knife marks were gone, covered with fresh spackle that was still slightly damp if you touched it, but visually seamless. When the deputy pushed on the wall, nothing moved. "There's no room back here," he said. "This is a foundation wall." I showed them my phone, the photos, the video. The sergeant looked at them, looked at me and said, "Sir, I see a basement with some furniture. I'm not seeing what you're describing." I looked at my phone. The photos of the hidden room were gone. The video was gone. Just the suitcase photos remained. Everything else had been deleted. Martin had access to our Wi-Fi. He'd given us the password himself. I don't know if he got into my phone through the network or if he'd handled it physically during one of his nighttime visits, but the evidence was gone. The sergeant took me aside and asked gently if I was under any stress. He asked if we'd been drinking. Nadia was crying in the car. I looked like a lunatic. Martin called me that evening. His voice was the same warm, concerned tone. I heard the police came out again. "I'm so sorry you've had a bad experience. I want to offer you a full refund." I reported him to Airbnb. They investigated. 3 weeks later, I got a form email saying they'd found no evidence of a violation and the listing would remain active. Martin left us a review. It said Jake and Nadia were lovely guests, though they seemed to be going through a difficult time. I hope they find the peace they're looking for. 5 stars. We hired a private investigator. He found that Martin had owned the property for 19 years. He found that the lake house had been renovated 3 times each time by Martin himself, no permits pulled. He found that 2 other couples had left early in the past 4 years, but neither had filed formal complaints. One of them had left a vague 3-star review that said, "Beautiful property, but we felt uneasy and left a day early." It had been buried under 100 glowing reviews. The PI also found that Martin had a background in home automation and security systems. We couldn't prove anything in court. The wall was solid by the time anyone official saw it. My deleted photos were unrecoverable. Nadia and I became the cautionary tale that nobody believes the couple who had a breakdown at an Airbnb. The listing is still up. I check it sometimes, which my therapist says I should stop doing. Last week, a new review appeared. A woman named Sarah wrote, "Martin thinks of everything. It felt like he was always one step ahead of us. Truly a magical stay." I stared at that review for 20 minutes. I don't know if she's okay. I don't know if she ever noticed. And the worst part, the part that keeps me up at night, the part that makes me check every lock 3 times, is that I don't know how many people stayed in that house and never felt a thing. Never noticed the seam in the wall. Never checked their suitcase twice. They just left their 5-star review. And went home.
Story 2.
I used to run marathons for the silence. For those hours where the only voice in my head was my own breathing, my own heartbeat, my own 2 feet hitting pavement in a rhythm that told me I was alive. I need you to remember that. I need you to remember that I was a woman who ran 26 miles for fun, because what I'm about to tell you is the story of how a doctor looked at that woman, looked at me 17 times over 2 years, and told me the thing trying to kill me was all in my head. My name is Claire. I'm 34. I live in Lakewood, Colorado, about 15 minutes west of Denver, in a neighborhood with good schools and wide sidewalks, and the kind of quiet that makes you think nothing bad can happen here. I've been running competitively since college. Half marathons, full marathons, a couple of ultras. I'm not elite. I'm not sponsored. But I'm serious. I train 5 days a week. I track my splits. I know my body the way a mechanic knows an engine. I can feel when something's off by a fraction of a second, a half beat too many. And in March of 2021, something was off. It started small. A heaviness in my chest during tempo runs, like someone had laid a sandbag across my sternum. I'd finish a 6-mile loop and need to sit in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive home. My resting heart rate, which had been a steady 52 for years, crept up to 68, then 74. I was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix, a bone-deep exhaustion that made me feel like I was dragging my skeleton through wet concrete. So I did what you're supposed to do. I made an appointment with my primary care physician, Dr. Nathan Harold, who I'd been seeing for 3 years. I sat on that crinkly paper in his exam room and I told him everything. The fatigue, the chest pressure, the heart rate climb. I told him my aunt died at 41 from a cardiac rhabdomyoma, a rare tumor that grew inside her heart. I told him my grandmother had one removed at 56. I told him I wanted imaging, an echocardiogram, a CT scan, something. He listened. He nodded. He checked my blood pressure normal, listened to my heart with a stethoscope for maybe 8 seconds. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Claire, you're a young, healthy, athletic woman. This sounds like anxiety." He prescribed me sertraline, an SSRI, for the anxiety he decided I had in the span of a 10-minute appointment. I took it because he was the doctor, because I thought maybe he was right. Maybe the pandemic had gotten to me. Maybe I was stressed about work, about my marriage, about the 1,000 small things that pile up when you're not paying attention. I took the sertraline for 6 weeks and felt nothing change, except now I also couldn't sleep. I went back, appointment number 2. I told him the medication wasn't helping. I told him the chest pressure was worse. I told him I'd had to drop out of a half marathon at mile 9 because I felt like I was breathing through a coffee straw. He increased my dose. He told me exercise-induced anxiety was more common than people think. He told me to try yoga. I want to be very clear about something. I was not hysterical. I was not vague. Every single time I walked into that office, I came with data. Heart rate logs from my Garmin, training notes, a printed family medical history that I had highlighted and organized. I handed him a folder, a literal folder at appointment number 4 with my aunt's death certificate and my grandmother's surgical records. He flipped through it, set it on the counter, and said, "Family history doesn't mean destiny, Claire. Let's not go looking for problems." Let's not go looking for problems. That sentence lives in my chest now like a shard of glass. Over the next 18 months, I went back 15 more times. 17 total visits, The symptoms escalated in ways that were impossible to ignore, except apparently they were very possible to ignore if you'd already decided your patient was an anxious woman who needed to calm down. I developed a dry cough that wouldn't quit. I started getting dizzy, standing up. I had episodes where my heart would race to 160 while I was sitting on my couch watching television. I lost 11 pounds without trying. My face looked gray in photographs. At appointment number 9, I cried. I sat there and cried and said, "Something is wrong with me. Please just order a scan." He handed me a tissue and referred me to a therapist. At appointment number 12, I brought my husband Matt because I'd read that women are taken more seriously when a man corroborates their symptoms. Dr. Harold told Matt that I was hyper-focused on health and that it was feeding the anxiety cycle. Matt squeezed my hand in the parking lot afterward and said, "We'll figure this out." But I could see it in his eyes, the flicker of doubt, the wondering if maybe the doctor was right. And that's the thing that almost broke me. Not the pain, not the exhaustion, the loneliness of screaming into a void shaped like a man with a medical degree who had decided what I was before I ever opened my mouth. At appointment number 15, I asked for a referral to a cardiologist. He said it wasn't warranted. I asked if I could get one anyway. He said he wouldn't feel comfortable referring me for unnecessary testing because it could, and I swear on my life these were his words, reinforce the anxiety pattern. I should have found another doctor. I know that. Everyone says that. But here's what people don't understand. I was exhausted. I was running on fumes. I was spending every spare ounce of energy just trying to function, to work, to train at a fraction of what I used to keep showing up to a life that felt like it was slowly dimming. Finding a new primary care doctor in the Denver metro area with my insurance meant a 4-month wait. I was on 3 waiting lists. I was trying. On October 8th, 2023, I ran the Denver Rock and Roll Marathon. I shouldn't have. I knew I shouldn't have, but I've been training for it for a year, and some stubborn, furious part of me needed to prove to Dr. Harold, to myself, to whatever was happening inside my body, that I was still me, that I was still the woman who ran marathons for the silence. I made it to mile 25. I could see the finish line. I could hear the crowd. And then the world tilted sideways and the pavement came up to meet my face and everything went black. I woke up in the ER, Swedish Medical Center, with an oxygen mask on my face and a cardiologist named Dr. Priya Anand standing over me with an expression I will never forget. It wasn't pity. It wasn't panic. It was controlled professional rage. They'd done a CT scan within 20 minutes of my arrival. Standard protocol for a collapse with cardiac symptoms. And there it was. A tumor the size of a tennis ball, a cardiac fibroma pressing against my left atrium, compressing my pulmonary veins, slowly strangling my heart's ability to pump blood. It had been growing for years. It was clearly visible, unmistakable, the kind of thing that would have shown up on any imaging ordered at any point in the previous 24 months. Dr. Anand sat on the edge of my bed and said, "Who is your primary care physician?" And when I told her how many times I'd asked for a scan, she closed her eyes for a long moment and then said very quietly, "I'm so sorry, Claire." I had surgery 11 days later. They cracked my sternum open and removed a mass that had been slowly killing me, while a man with a stethoscope told me to try yoga. The tumor was benign, not cancerous, but its location meant it had caused structural damage to my heart that may be permanent. I may never run a marathon again. I may never run at all. My cardiologist says we won't know the full extent of the damage for another year. I filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Medical Board in November. In January, I retained a malpractice attorney. We have all 17 visit records. We have my written request for imaging documented in his own notes, dismissed in his own handwriting. We have the family history I provided, which he acknowledged, receiving, and chose to disregard. We have a tumor that was large enough and positioned clearly enough that 3 independent radiologists have now confirmed it would have been detectable on imaging as early as mid-2021. Dr. Harold's attorney has responded. Their defense is that his clinical judgment was reasonable given the presentation. That anxiety is a valid diagnosis, that I was free to seek a second opinion at any time. And that last part is what keeps me up at night, because they're going to use my own persistence, the fact that I kept coming back to him instead of leaving as evidence that I trusted his judgment. They're going to use my loyalty against me. But here's what I know. I know that I walked into that office 17 times and begged a man to look harder. I know that I brought receipts, literal documented, highlighted receipts, and he set them on the counter and didn't look. I know that my aunt is dead and my grandmother has a scar down her chest, and I told him that, and he called it anxiety. I know that a tennis ball was growing against my heart while he told me to breathe deeper. I'm not running anymore. Not right now. Maybe not ever. But I am not done fighting. Because the silence I used to chase on those long runs, I found a different kind now. It's the silence of a doctor's office where no one is listening. And I'm going to make sure that silence is so loud, it's the last thing Dr. Nathan Harold ever hears.
Story 3.
I used to love coming home after a 12-hour shift. Kicking off my shoes, pouring a glass of cheap wine, running a bath so hot it turned my skin pink. My apartment on the second floor of a graystone in Logan Square was the first place that ever felt like mine. 800 square feet of freedom. I want you to remember that feeling, that sense of safety, because I need you to understand what it means when someone takes it from you. My name is Dana. I'm 27. I'm a trauma nurse at Stroger Hospital, which means I spend my nights elbow deep in the worst things people do to each other. I thought I understood violence. I thought I understood predators. I didn't know one was living directly above me. The first sign was small. So small, I almost feel stupid talking about it. I came home one Tuesday in November and my bathroom towel was on the wrong hook. Left hook instead of right. I'm particular about things you have to be when you work in a hospital, but I told myself I was tired. I told myself I probably moved it and forgot. Then it was the window. I always lock the window above the fire escape before I leave. Always. But I came home and it was unlocked. Not open, just unlocked. Like someone wanted a way back in. I mentioned it to my landlord, Gerald Voss. 62 years old, retired electrician, lived on the third floor. He'd been perfectly pleasant when I signed the lease. Helped me carry boxes up the stairs. Told me to call him Jerry. When I told him about the window, he frowned and said the building was old, that latches sometimes slipped. He said he'd look into it. A week later, I came home and smelled cologne. Not mine. Not any product I own. A sharp woody scent hanging in the bathroom air like someone had just been standing there. I changed the locks that night. Deadbolt chain, the works. I paid a locksmith $160 I didn't really have, and I slept better for exactly 4 days. Then I came home from a double shift and found a new scratch around the deadbolt. Fresh brass shavings on the floor, so small you'd miss them if you weren't looking. But I was looking now. I changed the locks again. Different brand, higher security. I also bought a cheap indoor camera, one of those little white ones you stick on a shelf, and pointed it at the front door. The next day I checked the footage from work on my lunch break. At 11:47 a.m., my front door opened. Gerald Voss walked in carrying a small toolkit. He moved through my apartment like he owned it, which technically he did, but there was nothing to fix. No maintenance request. No emergency. He walked to the bathroom, stayed in there for 6 minutes, then left. He locked the door behind him with what I can only assume was a master key he'd had cut. I felt sick. Physically sick. I went to the bathroom at the hospital and threw up my coffee. But I didn't call the police. Not yet. Because I knew what they'd say. Landlord entered the unit without notice. It's a lease violation, not a crime. File a complaint with the city. I'd seen enough people dismissed by the system to know that creepy doesn't move the needle. I needed more. So I went home that night and I searched. I searched every inch of that apartment like I was prepping a trauma bay, methodical, thorough, missing nothing. I checked the outlets, the vents, the light fixtures. I checked behind the mirror. I checked the carbon monoxide detector in the hallway. Then I climbed onto the edge of my bathtub and looked at the smoke detector directly above it. It was hardwired into the ceiling, which made sense for an old building. but when I unscrewed the cover and pulled it down, my hands started shaking. There was a pinhole camera nestled inside. Tiny. Professional grade. Wired directly into the building's electrical, so it never needed batteries. A thin Ethernet cable ran from it up through a drilled hole in the ceiling up into the 3rd floor. Into Gerald's apartment. I stood there on the edge of my bathtub holding this thing, and the room tilted. Every bath I'd taken, every time I'd stepped out of the shower, every night I'd stood in front of that mirror. He'd seen all of it. I wanted to rip it out. Every cell in my body screamed at me to tear it from the ceiling and smash it on the floor. But I didn't. Because that camera was evidence, and evidence was the only thing that was going to put him away. I put the cover back on. I climbed down. And then I sat on my bathroom floor and cried so hard. I couldn't breathe. When I was done, I washed my face and I got to work. I called my friend Marcus, who works in IT at Northwestern. I told him everything. He came over that night with a laptop and a network scanner. We traced the Ethernet cable signal. It was streaming to a local server, not cloud-based local, and Marcus was able to identify the device's MAC address and the IP it was routing to. The server was registered to the residential address directly above mine. Gerald Voss. 3rd floor. Marcus looked at me and said, "Dana, this isn't a lease violation. This is a felony." Illinois is a 2-party consent state for recording. Unauthorized video surveillance in a bathroom is a Class 4 felony video exploitation of a private space. If he was storing the footage, that's additional charges. If he was distributing it, we were talking federal. But here's the thing, no one tells you about gathering evidence against someone who lives 12 feet above your head. You still have to sleep there. You still have to hear his footsteps on the ceiling. You still have to walk past his door on the stairs and smile and say good morning, because if he suspects anything, if he thinks for 1 second that you know, he will destroy that server and every file on it, and it becomes your word against his. So I performed. For 9 days, I performed. I kept my routine exactly the same. I showered at the hospital when I could, but I still had to use the bathroom at home. I hung a towel over the smoke detector like it had fallen from the hook, casual enough to seem accidental. I smiled at Gerald in the hallway. I asked him about the Bears game. And every night I lay in bed knowing he was up there, probably watching a feed of my empty bathroom, waiting for the towel to come down. Meanwhile, Marcus and I documented everything. We had the footage from my shelf camera showing Gerald entering without permission 3 separate occasions. We had photographs of the pinhole camera in situ. We had the network trace linking the camera's feed to his address. I kept a written log with dates, times, and descriptions of every anomaly I had noticed going back to September. On day 9, I walked into the Chicago Police Department's 14th District Station and asked to speak with a detective. I brought a folder 2 inches thick. The detective's name was Rojas. She was maybe 40, and she didn't blink when I laid it all out. She looked at the network trace, looked at the photographs, and said, "We're going to need a warrant for his unit, and I want to move fast." She asked me one question I'll never forget. She said, "How long do you think this has been going on?" I told her I'd lived there 14 months. She closed her eyes for just a second. Then she picked up the phone. They executed the warrant 2 days later. I wasn't there. Rojas made me stay at Marcus's place. She called me at 4 p.m. They found the server. They found 14 months of footage. They found footage of the previous tenant too, a woman named Kiko, who'd lived there for 2 years before me. Gerald had built a library. Organized by date. Hundreds of hours. He was arrested in his living room still wearing his slippers. He told the officers it was his building and he had a right to monitor his property. He said it with a straight face. Gerald Voss was charged with 2 counts of unauthorized video recording, 1 count of video exploitation, and 1 count of unlawful surveillance. The state's attorney added a charge of criminal trespass after reviewing my shelf camera footage. He posted bail. His attorney tried to argue the cameras were part of a security system. The judge wasn't buying it. I broke my lease that week. I didn't ask for my deposit back. I moved into a studio in Pilsen that cost more than I can comfortably afford, and the first thing I did was check every smoke detector, every vent, every outlet. I still do that every single day. Keiko and I are both cooperating with the prosecution. We've never met in person, but we've talked on the phone twice. The second time she cried and told me she'd always felt something was wrong in that apartment, but convinced herself she was being paranoid. That's the thing about this kind of violation. It makes you doubt your own instincts. It makes you feel crazy for trusting the feeling in your gut. And then when you find out you were right, you don't feel vindicated. You feel sick. Because your gut was screaming the whole time and you kept telling it to shut up. Gerald Voss is awaiting trial. He still owns the building. And somewhere in that gray stone in Logan Square, there might be wires in the walls I never found. I try not to think about that. But I do. Every night I do.
Story 4.
I handed my sister the spare key on a Tuesday night in March, and that single act of kindness became the worst decision I've ever made in my life. She showed up at my door with 2 suitcases, mascara streaked down her face, and her kids, my niece and nephew 7 and 9, half asleep in the backseat of her minivan. Derek had finally pulled the trigger on the divorce. She said she just needed a couple weeks to figure things out. A couple weeks. I remember those words exactly because I've replayed them in my head about 10,000 times since. My name's Marcus. I'm 34. I'm an electrician. I've owned my house in Columbus, a 3-bedroom ranch in Westerville since I was 28. Paid my mortgage on time every single month. Finished the basement myself. Framed it, drywalled it, ran the electrical, put in a full bathroom. That basement was nicer than most apartments. And I gave it to my sister Danielle because that's what family does. Or at least that's what I thought family does. The first 2 weeks were fine. Danielle kept to herself mostly. The kids were polite. I'd come home from a job site, there'd be dinner on the stove sometimes, and I thought, okay, this is working. She was looking at apartments on her phone. She mentioned a place in Reynoldsburg. I didn't push. Week 3 is when things started shifting. Little things. She rearranged my living room furniture. Didn't ask. She signed up for Amazon deliveries using my address, not temporarily, but as her primary. I found mail from the school district addressed to her. I picked it up, looked at it, and my stomach dropped. She had enrolled both kids at Charrington Elementary. Using my address. Without saying a single word to me about it, I confronted her that night. Tried to keep it calm. I said, Danielle, you enrolled the kids here. She didn't even flinch. She said, they need stability, Marcus. I can't keep bouncing them around. I told her I understood that, but she couldn't just use my address for school enrollment without asking me. She looked at me like I was being unreasonable. Like I was the problem. That was the first time I felt the ground shift under me. A week later, I came home from work on a Friday. I went to open the basement door, the one at the top of the stairs that leads down from my hallway, and my key didn't work. I tried it again. Nothing. I jiggled it thinking maybe the lock was sticking. Then I looked closer. She had changed the lock. On a door inside my own house. I knocked. Danielle opened it with this look on her face. Not guilty, not apologetic. Defiant. She said the kids needed privacy. She said she'd bought a better lock because the old one was flimsy. I stood there in my own hallway, locked out of my own basement, and I didn't even know what to say. I told her to change it back. She said she would. She didn't. The next Sunday, I went to my mom's house for dinner, same as every week. My brother Terrence was there, my Aunt Patricia, a few cousins. Normal Sunday. Except when I walked in, my cousin Keisha pulled me aside and said, "Congrats on the house thing with Danielle." I said, "What house thing?" Keisha looked confused. She said Danielle had told everyone that I had agreed to make her co-owner of the house, that it was a family arrangement, that we were going to split the mortgage and she was going to live there long term with the kids. I felt my blood go cold. I walked into that kitchen and looked at Danielle sitting at the table buttering a roll like nothing was wrong, and I said, "Can I talk to you outside?" She said, "After dinner." I said, "Now." We stood on my mother's back porch, and I told her she had no right to tell people she was co-owner of my house. She said, "I didn't say co-owner, I said we had an arrangement." I said, "There is no arrangement. You're staying temporarily. You need to start looking for a place." She crossed her arms and said something I will never forget. "I'm not leaving, Marcus. The kids are settled. This is their home now too." I went to a lawyer the following Monday. His name was Greg Hauser, and he practiced tenant-landlord law out of a small office on East Broad Street. I sat across from him and explained the situation, expecting him to say something simple like, "Just tell her to leave." Instead, he leaned back in his chair and said, "How long has she been living there?" I said, "About 6 weeks." He nodded slowly. He said, "She's established residency. Under Ohio law, she's a tenant. Even without a lease. Even without paying rent. You can't just change the locks on her or throw her stuff out. You have to formally evict her." I sat there and stared at him. My own sister. In my own house. And I needed a court order to get her out. I filed the eviction notice. Danielle was served. And that's when the real war started. She called my mother crying. She called my aunts. She called everyone. Within 48 hours, I had 7 family members blowing up my phone telling me I was heartless, I was cruel, I was punishing those kids. My mother called me and said, "Marcus, she's your sister. She has nowhere to go." I said, "Mom, she changed the locks on my basement door. She told people she owns my house." My mother said, "She's going through a divorce. You need to have compassion." Compassion. I had given her compassion. I had given her a free place to live, free utilities, free everything. And she repaid me by trying to take my house. The eviction process in Ohio is not fast. Danielle got a legal aid attorney. She contested the eviction. She claimed she had a verbal agreement with me, a verbal agreement that she could stay indefinitely. Her attorney filed motions. My attorney filed responses. The court date got pushed back. Then pushed back again. Meanwhile, I was living upstairs in my own house with my sister and her kids in the basement, and we weren't speaking. The tension was suffocating. I'd hear her TV through the floor at midnight. I'd find her kids' cereal bowls in my sink. She started using my washer and dryer at all hours. She parked her minivan behind my truck in the driveway, so I had to ask her to move it every morning before work. Every single Sunday, my mother would look at me across the dinner table with these sad, disappointed eyes. She never once looked at Danielle that way. Not once. Terrence pulled me aside one Sunday and said, "Bro, just let her stay. It's not worth splitting the family over." I said, "She's trying to claim ownership of my house, Terrence. My house that I bought. That I pay for." He shrugged and said, "She's family." Family. That word became a weapon. Every time I tried to enforce a boundary, someone swung it at me like a bat. The court date finally came 4 months after I filed. 4 months of living in a Cold War inside my own home. I showed up with Greg. Danielle showed up with her legal aid lawyer. The judge reviewed everything, the lack of a lease, the lack of rent payments, the school enrollment. I never authorized the change locks. Danielle's lawyer tried the verbal agreement angle. The judge asked Danielle directly, "Did the plaintiff ever agree to a permanent living arrangement?" Danielle hesitated. She looked at me. Then she said, "He said I could stay as long as I needed." The judge looked at me. I said a few weeks. I never agreed to anything permanent. I never agreed to co-ownership. I never agreed to school enrollment. The judge ruled in my favor. Danielle had 30 days to vacate. She didn't speak to me for the rest of that month. She moved out on day 29 into a 2-bedroom apartment in Whitehall that my mother co-signed for. On her way out, she left the basement trashed. Holes in the drywall. Stains on the carpet I'd installed myself. The bathroom faucet was leaking. She'd never told me. There was a note on the counter. It said, "Hope you're happy." I spent the next 2 weekends repairing what she'd damaged. Patching walls, replacing carpet, fixing the faucet, working in silence in a space I had built with my own hands, a space I had offered freely out of love. My mother still brings it up at Sunday dinner. She says I tore the family apart. She says Danielle is struggling. She says those kids miss their uncle. And every time I sit there and eat my food and say nothing because I learned something in those 4 months that no one in my family wants to hear, love without boundaries isn't love. It's an invitation to be consumed. I still own my house. I still pay my mortgage on time. The basement is finished again, clean, quiet, and empty. And the spare key sits in my junk drawer where it will stay. I'm never handing it to anyone again.
Story 5.
I trusted my neighbor for 6 years. I let his kids play in my garden. I ate his burgers every August, drank his cheap lager, and told him he was a good bloke. And the entire time, he was stealing from my family, including the medication that keeps my daughter alive. My name's Craig. I'm 43. I live in a cul-de-sac in North Leeds, one of those quiet estates where the houses all look the same and the bins go out on Tuesday. It's the kind of place where you leave your car unlocked, where parcels sit on the step for hours because nobody would ever touch them. Or so I thought. It started with something small. An Amazon parcel, a phone case for my wife, maybe 12 quid. Tracking said delivered, but it wasn't on the step when I got home. I shrugged it off. Happens, doesn't it? Driver marks it delivered early, drops it at the wrong house. I filed a claim, got a refund, forgot about it. Then it happened again. And again. Over the next few months, maybe 5 or 6 packages went missing. Some got refunded, some didn't. My wife started getting frustrated. I started blaming the delivery drivers. Royal Mail, Hermes, DPD, I was convinced they were all useless. But here's the thing that changed everything. My daughter Ellie is 11. She's type 1 diabetic. She's been on insulin since she was 4. We get her supplies delivered, insulin pens, test strips, glucose monitors, the lot. It comes through a pharmacy delivery service, usually every 2 weeks. One Thursday in March last year, the delivery didn't arrive. I called the pharmacy. They said it had been delivered at 2:15 in the afternoon and signed for... I asked them to send me the signature. They did. It wasn't mine. It wasn't my wife's. It was a scribble, barely legible, but it looked like someone had written, C. Hargreaves. That's my surname, except I was at work and my wife was picking Ellie up from school. Someone had walked up to my door, taken my daughter's insulin delivery, and signed for it using a version of my name. That's when I stopped blaming the postman. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not my wife, not my mates, nobody. I went online, bought a small wireless camera, the kind that looks like a doorbell, and mounted it above the front door angled to cover the full driveway and the path from the street. I also bought a second one, a tiny little thing, and hid it in the hedge that runs between our property and next door. The hedge belongs to both of us, me and my neighbor Darren. Darren Whitworth. 41. Football coach for the under-12s at the local club. The kind of bloke everyone likes. Always out front, washing his car, always waving, always got time for a chat. His wife Paula runs a cake stall at the school fair. Their son plays with Ellie sometimes. We've been to their barbecues every summer since we moved in. I had absolutely zero reason to suspect him. The first week, nothing happened. No deliveries went missing, nothing on camera. I almost took them down. Then on day 9, I ordered a pair of trainers. Tracking set out for delivery. I watched the live feed from my phone at work. At 1:47 in the afternoon, the DPD driver walked up, left the parcel by the door, and drove off. At 1:53, 6 minutes later, I watched Darren walk through the gap in the hedge, look both ways, pick up the parcel, and walk back through the hedge into his garden. Calm as anything, like he was picking up his own post. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wanted more. Over the next 3 weeks, I ordered small items, cheap stuff, things I didn't need, books, cables, a kitchen timer. I staggered the deliveries across different days and times. Darren took 4 out of 7. Always the same routine. He'd wait a few minutes. After the driver left, check the street, come through the hedge, grab it, and disappear. He never rushed. He never looked nervous. He'd clearly been doing this for a very long time. Then I found the rest of it. I started checking online marketplaces, eBay, Facebook Marketplace, Vinted. I searched for items I knew had been delivered to my address and gone missing over the past 2 years. And there they were. A Bluetooth speaker I'd ordered for my wife's birthday, sold on eBay by a seller called DW Bargains. A set of resistance bands. A kid's science kit I'd bought for Ellie's Christmas stocking. All listed, all sold, all from the same account. The profile picture was a Leeds United badge, but the postage location was our postcode. It was Darren. He wasn't just taking my stuff on impulse. He was running an operation. He was taking deliveries, checking what was inside, keeping what was valuable, and reselling the rest. The forged signatures, the timing, the hedge, he'd mapped the whole thing out. I sat in my car outside the house for 20 minutes that night, engine off, just staring at his front window. His kids were watching telly. I could see the blue light flickering. Paula walked past the window carrying a mug. And I thought, do I call the police? Do I knock on his door? Do I burn the whole thing down? Because here's what kept eating at me. He took Ellie's insulin. He signed for it. He knew what it was. The box says it right on the label, temperature-sensitive medical supply. And he took it anyway. My daughter could have gone into a crisis. She nearly did that night because we had to scramble to get emergency supplies from the hospital pharmacy at 9 o'clock at night while Ellie cried because she was scared. And the whole time it was sitting in Darren's house, or in the bin, or sold to God knows who. I chose to confront him first. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me still couldn't believe it. Maybe because I wanted to see his face. I went over on a Saturday morning. Paula was out. His kids were at football practice, ironic since he was supposed to be coaching. I knocked. He opened the door in a tracksuit, coffee in hand, and smiled. "All right, Craig, what's up?" I held up my phone and pressed play. The footage. Him walking through the hedge. Him picking up the parcel. Him looking both ways like a man who knows exactly what he's doing. His face didn't crumble the way I expected. It went blank, completely flat, like a mask had fallen off and there was nothing behind it. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He said, and I'll never forget this, he said, "How far back does the footage go?" Not "I'm sorry." Not "I can explain." He wanted to know how much I had on him. I told him everything. The camera, the eBay account, the forged signatures, the insulin. I told him I had enough to go to the police, and that what he'd done to Ellie's medication was criminal, not just theft, but something that could have endangered her life. My voice cracked when I talked about her. I didn't want it to, but it did. He leaned against the doorframe and rubbed his face. Then he tried to play the card I knew was coming. "Craig, mate, we're neighbors. We're friends. Let's sort this out between us. I'll pay you back. Every penny. Just don't involve the police. Think about my kids. Think about Paula." I looked at him and I said, "You didn't think about Ellie. I called the police that afternoon. They came, took my footage, took my statement, and arrested Darren the following Tuesday. The investigation turned up more than just my parcels. 3 other houses on the cul-de-sac had reported missing deliveries over the past 2 years. Nobody had ever connected them. Nobody had ever suspected Darren. He'd stolen from the Patels at number 4, from old Mrs. Grady at number 9, from the young couple who just moved in at number 12. The total value was estimated at over £4,000. He was charged with theft fraud by false representation, and because of the insolent, reckless endangerment, he pleaded guilty to the theft and fraud. The endangerment charge was dropped in a plea deal, which still makes me sick. The cul-de-sac changed after that. Not in the way you'd think. Some neighbors thanked me. Some avoided me. Mrs. Grady said she'd suspected something for months but didn't want to cause trouble. The Patels said they'd mentioned missing parcels to Darren himself, and he'd told them it was probably kids from the estate. Paula moved out within a month, took the kids to her mom's in Harrogate. The house went up for sale. The for sale sign stood there for weeks like a headstone, and the thing that still sits with me, the thing I turn over at 3 a.m. when I can't sleep, is how long it went on. 2 years. Maybe more. All because we trusted him. All because he smiled and waved and coached football and flipped burgers on a Sunday. All because in a quiet cul-de-sac in Leeds, nobody wants to be the one who points a finger. We'd rather lose 100 parcels than lose the peace. I know that now, and I know something else. The peace was never real. It was just silence. And silence is where people like Darren do their best work.
Story 6.
My father died on a Tuesday. I know that because I was sorting the second delivery on Kirkstall Road when my phone buzzed, and I remember thinking it was probably a scam text because nobody ever called me. Nobody had called me in years. His name was Gerald Whitmore. He was 78. He'd lived in the same house in Headingley for 40 years, and I hadn't set foot inside it in over a decade. That wasn't my choice, not entirely, but I'll get to that. I'm a postal worker. Have been for 16 years. I wake up at 3:30, I sort letters, I walk my round, I come home to a one-bedroom flat above a chippy in Armley, and I eat something from a tin. That's my life. That was my life before the solicitor's letter arrived, and honestly, I expected it to be my life after. I was wrong. The letter came 3 weeks after the funeral. A funeral I wasn't invited to, by the way. My sister Denise handled the arrangements, and she told the family I was in no fit state to attend. I found out he was in the ground from a cousin's Facebook post. I sat on my kitchen floor and cried for an hour. Not because I'd lost him a long time ago, but because someone had stolen my chance to say goodbye, and I knew exactly who. The solicitor was a woman named Patricia Oakes, small office on Park Row. She sat me down, offered me a cup of tea, and told me my father had left me everything. And when I say everything, I mean a property portfolio worth £2.3 million, 6 houses, 6 rental properties across Leeds and Bradford that my father had quietly accumulated over 30 years, remortgaging, reinvesting, building something brick by brick, while I thought he was just a retired bus driver living on his pension. Patricia watched my face and said, "He updated this will 14 months ago. He was very specific about his wishes. He wanted you to have it all." I asked about Denise. Patricia paused, and her pause told me everything. Your sister's not mentioned in the will. Your father was quite clear about that. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt sick, because I knew what was coming. Denise is 7 years older than me. She moved back into Dad's house in 2011 after her second divorce, and she positioned herself as his carer. And look, at first maybe it was genuine. Dad had a bad hip. He needed help around the house. But Denise didn't just help. She installed herself. She became the gatekeeper. Every time I tried to visit, there was a reason I couldn't. Dad's having a bad day. Dad's asleep. Dad doesn't want to see you right now. She'd call me and say things like, "He gets agitated when you come around, you know that." And eventually I believed her. I stopped trying. That's the thing about manipulation. It doesn't feel like manipulation when it's happening. It feels like you're being reasonable. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until the probate proceedings, was that Denise had been siphoning Dad's pension for over a decade. She'd set up a direct debit from his account into hers. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $300 there, but by the end, It was nearly the full amount. She was taking almost $1,500 a month. She told him it was for household bills. She told the family she was sacrificing her own life to look after him. She was bleeding him dry. When Denise found out about the will, she didn't cry. She didn't grieve. She lawyered up within 48 hours. Her solicitor filed a challenge under the Mental Capacity Act, claiming Dad lacked the cognitive ability to make a valid will. And here's where it gets truly ugly. She produced medical documents, letters supposedly from Dad's GP, suggesting he'd been diagnosed with moderate dementia 18 months before the will was signed. They were forged. I didn't know that yet, but they were forged. She had taken legitimate NHS letterhead from correspondence in Dad's house and fabricated the content. She'd done it carefully, professionally, like someone who'd been planning for this possibility. But the documents were only half her strategy. The other half was me. Denise started calling every aunt, uncle, and cousin in the family. She told them I had a drug problem. She said I'd been using heroin for years, that I'd stolen money from Dad in the past, that the reason Dad cut me off was because I'd turned up at his house off my head and threatened him. None of it was true. Not a single word. I've never touched drugs in my life. I barely drink. But Denise knew something fundamental about family dynamics. People believe the person who's already in the room. She'd been there for a decade playing the devoted daughter, and I'd been absent. So when she told them I was an addict, they had no reason to doubt her. My cousin Mark sent me a message saying, "You should be ashamed of yourself taking money from a dying man." My Auntie Joan blocked me on everything. People I'd known my entire life looked at me like I was something scraped off a shoe. I sat in my flat above that chippy, surrounded by the smell of frying oil, and I genuinely considered walking away from 2.3 million pounds just to make it stop. Patricia Oakes told me not to. She said, "Your father wanted this. If you walk away, she wins, and she's already been winning for years." So I didn't walk away. The probate court proceedings dragged on for 11 months. 11 months of my life consumed by affidavits and witness statements and legal fees I was paying with money I didn't have, putting it all on credit cards because the estate was frozen. Denise's solicitor was aggressive, theatrical, painting me as this predatory figure who'd swooped in on a confused old man. But then Patricia did something brilliant. She subpoenaed Dad's actual medical records directly from the GP surgery. There was no dementia diagnosis. There never had been. Dad's GP confirmed he'd seen Gerald Whitmore regularly until 6 months before his death, and at no point had there been any concern about his mental capacity. The letters Denise had produced didn't match any records held by the surgery. The fonts were wrong, the reference numbers didn't exist. When this was presented to the court, Denise's solicitor asked for an adjournment. You could see it on his face. He hadn't known. She'd lied to her own lawyer, but it was the bank statements that finished her. Patricia had requested a full financial audit of Dad's accounts as part of the estate proceedings, and what came back was devastating. 12 years of systematic transfers. Over £140,000 moved from Dad's account into Denise's. No invoices, no care agreements, no receipts. Just money disappearing month after month while she told everyone she was sacrificing everything to look after him. And buried in Dad's paperwork in a drawer in his bedroom, Patricia's team found a handwritten note. It wasn't part of the will, it had no legal standing, but the judge allowed it to be read into the record. It said, "To my son David, I am sorry I let her keep you away. I was weak and I was afraid. This is all I can do now. Please forgive an old man who should have been braver." I couldn't breathe when they read that out. I sat in that courtroom in my post office fleece because I'd come straight from my shift, and I put my hand over my mouth, and I tried not to fall apart in front of strangers. The judge upheld the will in its entirety. He noted the deeply troubling evidence of financial abuse and referred the forged documents to the police. Denise was escorted out by her solicitor, who dropped her as a client that same afternoon. She was never charged with fraud. The CPS decided it wasn't in the public interest, whatever that means. But she lost everything that mattered to her, the family's sympathy, the narrative she'd built, the money she'd been skimming. Last I heard, she was living in a housing association flat in Morley, telling anyone who'd listen that she'd been robbed of her inheritance. The family hasn't apologized. Not Mark, not Auntie Joan, not any of them. A few have quietly unblocked me. Nobody said sorry. I don't think they will. I still work at the post office. I kept my round. I bought a proper flat, nothing flashy, just somewhere that doesn't smell like chip fat. The properties are managed by a letting agency now, and every month the rent comes in, and every month I think about my dad sitting in that house with her writing that note, knowing exactly what she was, and not being able to stop it. He couldn't fight her while he was alive. So he fought her from the grave. And he won.
Story 7.
I know what my wife must have told people. I know I'm the bad guy in this story. The husband who lost his job and then lost his mind. The guy who accused his wife of cheating and demanded a paternity test for our son. I get it. From the outside it looks simple. But it was never simple. It was never about her. It was about me and the fact that I was drowning. Before all this, I was a man. I don't mean that in some macho chest-thumping way. I just mean I had a role. I had a purpose. I worked in logistics, a decent job with a decent salary. I got up every morning, put on a clean shirt, and went out into the world to solve problems. I provided. My wife Sarah had her career in marketing, and we were a team. We were equals. When our son Leo was born, everything was perfect. We had the house, the kid, the life we were supposed to have. I was a father, and I was a husband, and I was a provider. I knew who I was. Then the world shut down. The pandemic hit my company like a wrecking ball. One day I had a job, and the next I was packing up a cardboard box from my desk. Sarah's job was safe. She could work from home. Daycare closed. Suddenly I wasn't the provider anymore. I was the caregiver. At first it was fine. A novelty. More time with Leo, right, but the weeks turned into months. Sarah's world stayed big. She had Zoom calls, deadlines, important projects. Her office door would be closed for hours while I was in the living room, a prisoner in a kingdom of plastic toys and endless snacks. My world shrank until it was just the four walls of our house. My daily problems weren't supply chain issues anymore. They were about negotiating nap times and figuring out why a 3-year-old was screaming about the wrong color cup. I love my son. I need to say that because I know it sounds like I don't. I do. But my love for him got tangled up in my resentment for the life he represented. He was the anchor holding me in a place I didn't want to be. Every time he cried for me, every Daddy watch this, it was a reminder that this was my entire existence now. I wasn't a man with a career anymore. I was just Daddy. I felt my identity chipping away day by day. I was becoming a warden, not a father. That's when the thought started. It was small at first, just a weird, quiet whisper in the back of my mind during a particularly bad tantrum. Asterisk. What if this isn't my lifetimes? It was a crazy thought, and I'd push it away. But it kept coming back stronger each time. My anxiety latched onto it. It wasn't a logical thought. I never, not for 1 second, actually believed Sarah had cheated on me. I trusted her completely. This was different. This was a fantasy. A way out. The thought grew into a feeling. A deep physical gut feeling that Leo and I weren't connected. I'd look at him while he slept and feel nothing but a strange distance. He had Sarah's eyes, her smile. I couldn't see myself in him at all. The more I thought about it, the more real it felt. This feeling became my obsession. It was the only thing that gave me a strange, twisted kind of hope. If he wasn't my son, then this wasn't my life. I wasn't a failure who lost his job and got trapped at home. I was just a guy who had been living the wrong story. I could walk away. I could be free. It took me a month to get the courage to say it out loud. I found Sarah in the kitchen one night after Leo was asleep. I tried to explain it the best I could. I told her about the anxiety, the feeling that the walls were closing in. I told her something felt fundamentally wrong and that I couldn't shake this horrible feeling of disconnection from our son. I told her I needed a paternity test. The look on her face broke me. It wasn't understanding. It was pure, unfiltered hurt. She didn't hear a desperate man asking for help. She heard an accusation. "You think I cheated on you?" she asked, her voice trembling. I tried to explain again that it wasn't about her, it was about me, about my head being messed up. But the damage was done. It became about her honor, her faithfulness. It wasn't about the fact that I felt like I was suffocating every single day. She eventually agreed, but with a condition. We had to do couples therapy. To me, it felt like a punishment. A bunch of pointless talking that would just delay the one thing I needed an answer. It was a rigmarole, a hoop she was making me jump through to get what I wanted. But it was the only way she'd agree, so I said yes. Our first session was over Zoom. A therapist with a kind face and a blurry virtual background asked me how I felt. I told her what I knew she and Sarah wanted to hear. I said I was struggling, that I loved my family, and that I was sure the test would be a relief. I said I hoped the results would kill this anxiety and let me move on. It was a lie. All of it. I wasn't hoping for relief. I was hoping for an escape hatch. Relief would be finding out he wasn't mine. Finding out he was my son would be a life sentence. It would mean this was real. This was my life forever. There would be no way out. We did the test a few days later. A kit came in the mail, we swabbed our cheeks and Leo's and we sent it back. Then we waited. It was the longest week of my life. Every time I looked at Leo, my heart pounded. Please, 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 I'd think. Let me be wrong about being his father. The email arrived on a Tuesday, just an hour before our next scheduled therapy session. The subject line was, "Clinical, your paternity test results are available." My hands started shaking so badly I could barely use the mouse. Sarah was already logged into the Zoom call from her office upstairs. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and joined the meeting. The therapist's face popped up next to Sarah's. "Hi, John," she said gently. "How are you feeling?" "The results came," I said. My voice was hoarse. Sarah's eyes were wide. She looked terrified and hopeful all at once. "Did you open it?" "No," I said. "Not yet." "Would you like to do it together now?" the therapist asked. "We can talk through whatever comes up." I nodded, unable to speak. My world had shrunk to the size of that single email in my inbox. My entire future was inside it. Freedom or prison. I moved the cursor over the email, my finger hovering over the trackpad. This was it. The last door. I took a deep breath that didn't feel like it reached my lungs, and I clicked. The page loaded. It was a PDF, all clinical and official looking, with a company logo at the top. I scanned past the jargon, my eyes hunting for the one thing that mattered. And there it was, in a bolded box near the bottom, asterisk. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. Asterisk. The words below it swam in my vision. Jonathan Miller is not excluded as the biological father of the child Leo Miller. Asterisk. Is not excluded. Asterisk. The air in my lungs turned to cement. It was over. The last door, the one tiny insane escape hatch I'd been clinging to for months, had just been slammed, bolted, and barricaded in my face. This was it. This was my life. There was no alternate story. I wasn't the victim of a misunderstanding. I was just a guy who lost his job and was trapped in a life he hated. I was a failure. And I was a father. John, the therapist's voice came through my laptop, speakers tinny and distant. What does it say? Sarah was leaning into her camera, her face a mess of anxiety. John, please. I couldn't form a sentence. I just stared at the screen. 99.9%. A life sentence handed down in a percentage. He's mine, I finally managed to say. The words felt like poison in my mouth. I heard Sarah let out a huge sob of relief. I could see her on the screen, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The therapist was smiling gently. Well, she said, that must be a huge weight off your shoulders, John. How are you feeling hearing that confirmed? How was I feeling? I felt like I had just watched my own execution. Relief was the last thing I felt. It was rage. A hot, silent, suffocating rage at the universe, at my bad luck, at my own trapped existence. My fantasy was dead. My hope was dead. I looked up at the camera. I tried to arrange my face into something that looked human. It's done, I said, my voice flat. That's it. It's done. Okay, the therapist said, her smile faltering a little. We can talk about what done means. Sarah, how are you feeling? Sarah wiped her eyes. I'm just so relieved, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I knew it, of course, but hearing it. Now we can move on. We can fix this. She looked at my little square on her screen. Right, John, we can fix this now. I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes on the screen. The number, 99.9%. John, the therapist prompted gently. Your silence is very powerful right now. Can you tell us what's going through your head? Nothing, I lied. It's just a lot to process. It's done, that's all. The rest of the session was a blur. Sarah and the therapist talked about moving forward, about rebuilding trust. I just nodded along, giving one-word answers. It was like watching a TV show about someone else's life. As soon as the therapist said our time was up, I closed the laptop without saying goodbye. I sat there in the silence of my study, the quiet hum of the computer the only sound. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Sarah came in and stood in the doorway. She had been crying, but she was smiling now. A real hopeful smile. It made my stomach turn. Hey, she said softly. I know that was hard. But it's over now. The crazy part is over. She came over and tried to put her arms around my shoulders from behind. I flinched, pulling away like she'd burned me. She froze. "John, what's wrong? This is good news." I stood up and turned to face her. "Is it?" I asked, and the bitterness in my own voice surprised me. Her smile vanished. "What do you mean? Of course it is. He's your son, our son. We can finally put this nightmare behind us." "You can," I said. "You get to be relieved. You get to be the good guy." "The good guy? What are you talking about? There are no good guys and bad guys, John. We're a family that's been struggling." She reached for my hand. "Talk to me. Tell me what you're feeling. I want to understand." And that's when I snapped. How could I possibly explain it to her? How could I say, "I'm not relieved, Sarah. I'm grieving. I'm devastated that our wonderful son is actually mine because I was praying he wasn't. I was hoping for a get-out-of-jail-free card and I didn't get it." It was a monstrous thought. It was the ugliest, most selfish thing a person could feel, and it was the absolute truth. Saying it out loud would make me a monster. But the monster was already there, scratching to get out. So I let it out. "You want to know what I'm feeling?" I yelled. The force of it shocked us both. I feel trapped. I feel like I'm suffocating in this house, in this life. This test was my only way out, and now it's gone. The color drained from her face. She looked at me like she'd never seen me before. "Your way out? A way out of what? Your family?" "Yes," I screamed, the word tearing out of my throat. "A way out of being a full-time nanny. A way out of a life where my biggest accomplishment of the day is getting a toddler to eat 3 bites of broccoli. I had a life before this. I had a purpose. Now I have nothing." Tears were streaming down her face now. "You have a son?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "You have me. And what a prize that is." I spat back the cruelty, feeling good like punching a wall. "I'm stuck here with a life I never wanted, and you want me to be happy about it." It was horrible. Every word was a sledgehammer, and I knew I was destroying everything, but I couldn't stop. The rage that had been building for months was finally boiling over. I was burning down my own life because I couldn't stand to live in it anymore. She just stared at me, her expression turning from hurt to horror and then to a cold, hard anger I'd never seen before. "Get out," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through my yelling like a knife. "What?" "Get out of my house. Go." The fight went out of me, replaced by a sudden terrifying emptiness. She was right. What else was there to do? I had let the monster out, and it had devoured everything. I didn't say another word. I walked past her, went upstairs to our bedroom, and pulled a duffel bag from the closet. I threw in some shirts, jeans, my toothbrush. I could hear her sobbing downstairs. As I walked past Leo's room, I saw the door was cracked open. His little blue lamp was on, casting a soft glow on his race car wallpaper. For a second I thought about looking in, but I couldn't. I couldn't face him. I went downstairs. Sarah was standing by the front door, her arms wrapped around herself. She wouldn't look at me. I walked out, closed the door behind me, and didn't look back. I'm at my brother's place now, sleeping on his couch. It's been 3 days. I know I'm the villain. I know I broke my wife's heart and betrayed my son in the worst way possible. I see that. But even now, sitting here in the quiet, all I feel is that same suffocating sense of being trapped. The paternity test didn't set me free. It just confirmed that the prison was real. I had hoped it would give me an excuse to leave my life, but instead I just blew it up. I had to get out. I couldn't be a husband and I couldn't be a father because somewhere along the way I completely forgot how to be a man.
Story 8.
My whole life has been about him. Let's call him Liam. He isn't just my boyfriend. He's my North Star, the fixed point I've always navigated by. We started dating when we were 14, two stupid kids who thought we knew everything about love. It turns out we were right, at least about each other. When it was time for college, we knew we couldn't stay together. We were going to schools 1,000 miles apart, and we didn't want to ruin what we had with a messy long-distance relationship. So we broke up. But it was never really a breakup. It was a promise. A see you later. We both knew without ever having to say the exact words that we were endgame. So I waited. I went to college, I got a degree, I started a career back in our hometown, and I waited for him to come back. For almost a decade, my life was on pause. Friends would ask me why I was still single, why I never seemed to get serious with anyone. How could I explain that I was already taken by a promise made when I was a teenager? People would look at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was. I watched all my friends meet people, fall in love, get engaged, buy houses. Their lives were moving forward, building chapter by chapter. Mine felt like I was stuck on the prologue, just waiting for the main character to show up. The loneliness was the worst part. It's a heavy, crushing weight, especially on a random Tuesday night when you're scrolling through someone else's wedding photos. You start to doubt everything. Was he still on the same page? Was I wasting my 20s waiting for a dream that might never come true? That's where the Tinder guy came in. I need you to understand it wasn't about him. I don't even remember his last name. He was from out of town, just passing through. It was a moment of weakness, a single night where I just wanted to feel wanted. I wanted to feel like a normal 27-year-old, not a girl in a glass case waiting for her prince to return. It was a brief distraction from the constant aching patience of waiting for my real life to begin with Liam. We used a condom. It was supposed to be safe, meaningless, and forgotten. A tiny footnote in the story of us that no one would ever have to read. Then a few months later it happened. Liam called and told me he was moving home. For good. It was like the sun finally came out after a long gray winter. The world which had felt tilted and wrong for years finally clicked into place. The day he got back, he came straight to my apartment. The second I opened the door, it was like no time had passed at all. That first night together was magic. It was a homecoming. With Liam, there's a trust that's so deep it's part of my DNA. We never used condoms. We never had. We were safe. We were home. We fell back into our old rhythm so easily. It was perfect. We were finally starting the life we had both put on hold for so long. Then a few weeks later I realized my period was late. I told myself it was just stress or the excitement of him being back throwing my body off. But another week passed and still nothing. My heart started hammering in my chest every time I thought about it. I finally bought a test, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open the box. I sat on the edge of the tub and watched in horror as 2 pink lines appeared. My blood ran cold. pregnant. How? The timing was all wrong. I called my doctor and made an appointment for an ultrasound, my voice a strangled whisper. Liam came with me, holding my hand, trying to be supportive, but I could see the confusion and fear in his eyes mirroring my own. In the dark, quiet room, the technician moved the cold wand over my stomach, and there it was on the screen. A tiny, flickering bean. "Okay," the doctor said, smiling kindly. "Everything looks good. Based on the measurements, you're about 6 weeks along." 6 weeks. The words echoed in my head, but they didn't make sense. It was like trying to solve a math problem where the numbers didn't add up. My mind raced backward, counting the days, the weeks. 6 weeks ago, Liam was still in another state, packing his life into boxes. He hadn't been here. He wasn't home yet. But the Tinder guy was. My one stupid, lonely, meaningless mistake had just planted a bomb in the middle of the future I had waited 13 years to build. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I had to tell him. That night, sitting on my couch, I watched the hope and happiness literally drain from his face as I explained the dates. I saw the man I loved, my future, my everything shatter right in front of me. And it was all my fault. The days that followed were the worst of my life. It was like living with a ghost. He was there, but he was gone. He was quiet, distant. Every time I looked at him, I could see him calculating, replaying everything, trying to understand how this could have happened. I could feel him slipping away. The promise we had built our lives on was crumbling to dust, and my panic was a physical thing, a constant knot of acid in my stomach. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I was losing him. After all this waiting, I was going to lose him for good over a single pathetic night of loneliness. I talked to my mom. I cried to my best friend. They all said the same thing in their own gentle ways. It was an impossible situation. It was him or the baby. But for me, it was never a choice. It couldn't be. Liam was the plan. Liam was the entire point. The baby, this stranger's baby, was a complication, a terrible accident that was threatening to undo everything I had ever wanted. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't lose him. So, I made the hardest decision of my life. With a shaking hand, I called the clinic. I scheduled the appointment. I had to fix this. I had to prove to him that he was what mattered. That times were what mattered. My stomach was in knots as I drove to his place, the words I needed to say stuck in my throat. I had to show him I was choosing him, that I was choosing us, and that I would do anything to erase this mistake. I walked up to his door, took a deep, shuddering breath, and knocked. He opened the door, and my heart just dropped. He looked awful. He had dark circles under his eyes, and he looked like he hadn't really slept in days, which was probably true. I hadn't either. The air between us was so thick and heavy, full of all the things we weren't saying. I was sure this was it. This was the moment he was going to say, "I can't do this," and my life would be over. Before he could say anything, the words just spilled out of me in a panicked rush. I made an appointment. He just stared at me, his expression blank. An appointment for what? For the abortion. I choked out tears already starting to well up in my eyes. I scheduled it. I'm taking care of it. I'm fixing this. I felt my voice breaking, my whole body shaking. It's you, Liam. It's always been you. I waited my entire life for you to come home. I can't lose you now. I won't. This thing, mistake. It can't be more important than us. Nothing is more important than us. I was full on sobbing by then, the kind of ugly crying you can't control. I just stood there on his doorstep, completely falling apart, basically begging him to see that I was choosing him. That I would always choose him. I expected him to look relieved or angry or something. But he didn't. He just stepped forward, wrapped his arms around me, and pulled me inside. He held me while I cried into his shirt, his hands stroking the back of my head. He didn't say anything for a long time, just let me get it all out. When my sobs finally started to quiet down, he gently pushed me back so he could look at me. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "Look at me. I need you to cancel that appointment." My blood ran cold all over again. Oh God, he was going to break up with me anyway. He didn't want me to do it for him. "No," I whispered. "Liam, please, you don't understand." "No times you, times don't understand," he said, cutting me off gently. I think we might be wrong. About everything." I just stared at him, confused. What was he talking about? "I haven't been sleeping," he said, leading me to the couch. "I've just been online reading. For days. I've read every medical website, every pregnancy forum, everything I could find. And we got it wrong. The doctor said you were 6 weeks pregnant. And we thought that meant we did it 6 weeks ago." "Right," I said, my voice hoarse. "And you weren't here." "Right," he agreed. "But that's not how it works. That's not how they date a pregnancy. They count it from the first day of your last period. Not from when you know." I felt my brain stutter, trying to process his words. My last period. I thought back. When was it? My cycle was always regular. I did the math in my head, my heart starting to pound in a completely new way. My last period started about 2 weeks before I slept with that guy. And about 3.5 weeks before Liam came home. Liam saw the look on my face. He grabbed a piece of paper and a pen from his coffee table and started scribbling down dates. "Your last period started here," he said, circling a date. "Conception usually happens about 2 weeks after that. So if you got pregnant around times here, asterisk." He drew another circle. The new circle landed squarely on the weekend he came home. On the night we were finally together again. A tiny, impossible sliver of hope cut through the fog of my despair. It was so fragile I was afraid to even breathe on it. "But are you sure?" I whispered. "How could we both get that so wrong?" "Because we're not doctors," he said, a little bit of the old Liam flashing in his eyes. "We panicked. We heard 6 weeks. And we just assumed the worst. But if this is right, it means the baby could be mine. The baby could be his. Our baby." The thought was so huge, so overwhelming, it almost knocked the wind out of me. The wait for the paternity test was actual torture. We canceled the clinic appointment, and the next day we were at a doctor's office for a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. They just took some of my blood and a cheek swab from him. They said the results would take about a week. That week felt longer than the 10 years I'd waited for him to come home. We were in limbo. We weren't fighting anymore, but we weren't fixed either. We were just holding our breath. We clung to each other, both terrified of the hope we were feeling. What if we let ourselves believe it only to have it ripped away? It felt safer to stay in the miserable certainty we had before. But we couldn't. That tiny sliver of hope was there, and it was growing every day. We were a team again, waiting for a verdict that would decide the entire course of our lives. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The subject line was just, "Your test results." I saw it pop up on my phone while I was at work, and I swear my heart stopped. I called Liam immediately. "It's here." "I'm on my way," he said, and hung up. I left work and met him at my apartment. We sat on the couch side by side, my phone in my hand. I couldn't bring myself to open it. My hands were shaking too badly. He took the phone from me, his own hands not much steadier than mine. He opened the email, pulled up the attached file, and we both leaned in to read the single life-altering line at the same time. Asterisk. Probability of paternity, 99.99. 9%. Asterisk. The relief was so powerful it felt like a physical wave hitting me. It knocked all the air from my lungs and all the strength from my body. I just collapsed against him, sobbing again, but this time it wasn't from fear or grief. It was from pure, unbelievable joy. He wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my hair, and I could feel him shaking too. We just held on to each other and cried on that couch, letting all the fear and pain and anxiety of the past few weeks wash away. It wasn't a nightmare. It was a miracle. We were so wrapped up in the panic and the guilt of my mistake that we misunderstood everything. My one night of loneliness hadn't destroyed our future. Our love on that very first night he came home had created a new one. It was real. It was ours. This baby wasn't a complication or a mistake. This baby was proof. Proof that we really were endgame. Proof that we were meant to be. My stupid, foolish mistake almost cost me everything, but in the end our love was stronger. It had been all along.
Story 9.
I know what you probably think of me. You might have even read her side of the story somewhere. I'm the monster. The abusive husband. I get it. I've seen the name she calls me in her texts to her friends when she thinks I'm not looking. But you weren't there. You don't know what she took from me. It wasn't just my trust. She took my whole life, the one I spent years building, and set it on fire. My world was perfect. I know that sounds arrogant, but it's true. And it wasn't an accident. I planned it. I got a stable job not because I loved the work, but because it meant we'd have a nice house, that our kids would have everything they needed. Stability. That was the most important word to me. I watched other guys, I knew guys at work, complain about their wives. They'd joke about the old ball and chain and sneak off on business trips to get a break. I never understood them. I felt sorry for them. They didn't have what I had. I had an angel. That's what my mom called her. My friends loved her. She was beautiful, smart, funny. She was the kind of wife that made other men look at you with respect. My identity wasn't just me. I was times her times husband. I was the guy who had it all figured out, the guy who won the lottery. Sure, other women would flirt sometimes. It happens. But I never once, not for a second, considered it. Why would I? It would be like burning down my own house just to feel warm for a minute. What we had was real. It was solid. It was the foundation for everything. The night she broke it all, she didn't just come home late. She came home wrong. She looked like a ghost walking through the door, all pale and shaky. I thought someone had hurt her. I asked what was wrong, and the words that came out of her mouth weren't a confession. It felt more like an execution. I slept with someone else. The words didn't just hang in the air. They went straight through my chest. In that single moment, the woman I married vanished. A stranger was standing in our kitchen crying tears that didn't make any sense to me. She kept saying she was drunk, that it was a huge mistake. A mistake? You forget to buy milk at the store. You don't make a mistake that involves taking your clothes off for another man. That's a choice. She chose. She chose a few hours of feeling good with a total stranger over our entire life, over our kids, over me. From that second on, a movie started playing in my head. A constant loop of her with him. I couldn't turn it off. I still can't. Her face, his hands, her sounds, it's a cancer in my brain. So, when she said she was sorry, I didn't even hear it. Sorry doesn't rebuild a house after it's been burned to the ground. Sorry doesn't erase the images. The marriage was over. She had killed it right there on the kitchen floor. I told her I wanted a divorce. It was the only thing that made sense. But she begged. She cried. She promised to fix it. Fix what you can't glue a mirror back together and not see the cracks. She dragged me to counseling. What a joke. I was supposed to sit in a beige room with a guy who gets paid to listen and share my feelings. My feeling was that I was sitting across from a liar. My feeling was that I wanted to throw up every time she looked at me with those big sad eyes. So I sat there. I scrolled on my phone. I did anything to not be in that room listening to the therapist ask his stupid questions. What are some steps you can take to rebuild trust? I wanted to laugh. The only step was to go back in time and stop her from walking out the door that night. When he kept pushing, asking me what I really wanted, I finally gave him an honest answer. Divorcing a whore, maybe. Her face crumpled. The therapist looked shocked. But it was the only real thing I'd said all day. It's what I saw when I looked at her. The next year was hell. She tried to make it up to me in all the wrong ways. She'd clean the house spotless, cook my favorite meals, acting like the perfect little wife. Like a tidy living room could somehow scrub the filth out of my mind. She kept saying she wanted to save us. I didn't want to save us. I wanted to see if there was anything left. I wanted to know how sorry she really was. So I pushed her. I know the things I said were ugly. I called her names. It wasn't a tactic. It was just the truth spilling out. It's what she had become to me. And the sex, that was different. I started demanding things I knew she hated. Things we'd never done. Part of me, a dark, twisted part, thought that if I could possess her in a way he never did, if she would do these things for me, the husband she betrayed, then maybe it would mean something. Maybe I could overwrite his memory. It was sick, I know. A desperate, broken kind of logic. But it was all I had left. It never worked, of course. It just made the movie in my head play in widescreen. Every time I touched her, I just wondered if he had touched her there too. I was drowning and I needed air. That's when I started talking to someone else. Just texting. A woman from an old job who'd moved across the country. It was nothing serious. I never met her, never planned to. But talking to her felt normal. It was a fantasy. A little window into a world where I wasn't the sucker whose perfect wife turned out to be just like everyone else's. For a few minutes a day, I wasn't the broken man living with the ghost of his marriage. I was just a guy talking to a woman, and it felt like breathing again. I started to hide my phone to guard it. I knew it was a stupid risk, but it was the only thing keeping me sane. And I guess I got careless, because the other day I saw her looking at me. Not with sadness, but with suspicion. She was watching me smile at my phone, a real smile, and I saw the question forming in her eyes. Of course, she confronted me. I knew she would. It was a few nights later. The kids were asleep, the house was quiet, and I was on the couch smiling at some stupid joke the woman had texted me. I looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold anger I hadn't seen before. It wasn't the sad, pleading look I was used to. This was different. "Who are you talking to?" she asked. Her voice was flat. I locked my phone and set it down. "Nobody." "Don't lie to me," she said, taking a step closer. "I see you. You guard that phone like it's your life. You smile at it more than you've smiled at me in a year. Are you cheating on me?" I almost laughed. The sound that came out was something between a cough and a bark. The hypocrisy of it was so thick I could have choked on it. Her. Accusing times me asterisk. After what she did. After she took a sledgehammer to our life for a cheap thrill with a stranger. All my pain, all the rage I'd been pushing down, it all just boiled over. "You don't get to ask me that question," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You lost the right to ask me anything like that the second you decided to spread your legs for someone else." Her face went pale. "That's not fair." Fair? I stood up then and I could see her flinch. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that I have to see his face every time I close my eyes? That I have to wonder what you did with him every time you touch me? You burned this whole house down, and now you're mad because you see me looking at a fire escape." She started to cry, the soft broken sobs that used to tear my heart out. Now they did nothing. "Just tell me," she whispered. "Did you sleep with her?" "No," I said, and it was the honest truth. "I haven't touched her. I haven't even met her. It's just talking. It's just a reminder that there's a world outside this hell you've made for us." I walked past her towards the kitchen, needing to put space between us. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. The game was over. But you know what? If you don't like it, you can leave. There's the door. If this is the final straw for you, then go. I expected her to scream, to throw something, to collapse on the floor, begging me to stop. She had done all of those things over the past year. But she didn't. She just stood there silent, the tears still tracking down her cheeks. I turned around from the kitchen sink and waited. The silence stretched on, and it was heavier than any of our fights. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely empty. All the fight was gone. "Okay," she said, so quietly I barely heard her. "If you want a divorce, I won't fight you anymore. If that's what it will take for you to be free of this, then I'll let you go." And just like that, the floor fell out from under me. It was the one thing I never expected her to say. All my pushing, all my cruelty, all the tests, it was all to see how far she would go to hold us together. I wanted her to prove that what we had was worth fighting for, even after she had broken it. Her giving up, her finally letting go, it meant the fight was over. It meant she finally saw it too. We were done. Truly irrevocably done. Something inside me just shattered. The rage that had been holding me up for a year evaporated, and there was nothing left but this gaping black hole of pain. My legs felt weak. I leaned against the counter and this sound came out of my throat. A horrible wounded animal sound. The dam broke. I started to sob. Not quiet tears like hers, but ugly, wrenching sobs that shook my whole body. She took a hesitant step towards me, her expression changing from defeat to shock, maybe even pity. I didn't want her pity, but I couldn't stop. I slid down the kitchen cabinets until I was sitting on the floor, my head in my hands, crying for everything. For the man, I used to be the guy who believed in perfect. For the woman, I thought she was my angel. For the family we were supposed to be. For the years we had that were now just a lie. She knelt in front of me, and for the first time in a year I reached for her. I pulled her into a hug, burying my face in her shoulder, and she held me back. It wasn't a hug of love or forgiveness. It was a hug at a funeral. We were two survivors clinging to each other in the wreckage, mourning the same death. We stayed like that for a long time on the cold kitchen floor, and we both knew it was the end. We agreed to separate that night. We're telling the kids this weekend. I'm moving out. I look at her now and I don't feel rage anymore. I just feel tired. I see the pain I've caused her this past year. I see the woman I tortured because I didn't know how to handle my own agony. She made a choice that night that destroyed me, and I made a series of choices that destroyed her. Maybe that makes us even, I don't know. I do know that I have to leave. I can't look at her at this house, at the life we built, without that movie playing in my head. I look in the mirror and I don't recognize the man I see. I'm not that happy, confident guy anymore. I'm a bitter, angry man who used cruelty as a shield. She thinks I became a monster. Maybe I did. But she's the one who let the monster out. I don't know if I can ever be a whole person again. But I know I can't find out here with her. The foundation is gone. The house is condemned. All that's left to do is walk away from the ashes and see if I can build something new just for myself somewhere else.
Story Teen.
I don't know why I'm writing this, except that I feel like I'm going crazy. In my own home, you try your whole life to do the right thing, to be the responsible one, and this is what you get. This is the thanks. For 25 years, I have been the heart of this house. My older brother, he's the man of the house, sure, but what does that even mean? It's me who makes sure things run. It's me who takes care of our mother, my mother who is old and needs constant attention. It's me who raises my two children, who makes sure my husband has a clean shirt for work. I manage Mama's small government stipend, and let me tell you, stretching that money to cover her medicine and her special foods and everything else is a full-time job. It's a thankless, invisible job, and I do it every single day. Then my niece came back. We took her in, of course. She was 19 pregnant, and the father was nowhere to be found. She made a terrible mistake, and family is family. So we took her and her little girl in. We gave them a room, a roof, food. We gave them a safe place when she had brought shame on us. For a few years it was fine. She was quiet, grateful. She knew her place. But then she got this job. Some fancy office thing with a good salary. And everything changed. Slowly at first, then all at once. Suddenly she wasn't the grateful little girl anymore. She was the one with the money, and she started acting like she owned the place. It started with the electricity bill. One day she just announced, "Don't worry about the electric anymore, Auntie, I've got it." It wasn't a question, it wasn't an offer. It was a declaration. It sounds nice, doesn't it? A big help. But it wasn't. It was a power move. Now every time I flip a light switch, I feel it. That little string she has attached to me, to all of us. It's not help, it's a leash. She pays the water bill sometimes too, whenever she feels like reminding us that she's the one keeping the taps on. Then she started with my children. She began giving them a weekly allowance. Behind my back at first. I only found out when my son came home with a new toy I knew we couldn't afford. When I asked him where he got the money, he said, "Cousin gave it to me." She gives my children money. My children. As if I'm not their mother. As if I can't provide for them. She's teaching them that she's the one to go to for things, not me. She's buying their affection and making me look like the mean mother who always says no because I have to budget and she doesn't. She is undermining me in my own home. Every day feels like a performance. She comes home from her important job dressed in her nice clothes and looks at us. She never says it, but I can see it in her eyes. The judgment. She looks at me managing the household chores. She looks at her uncle, my husband, tired after a long day of physical work, and I know what she's thinking. She thinks we're failures. She thinks we're stuck. Her success isn't a good thing for the family. It's a weapon she uses to make us feel small. It's a constant, silent reminder of everything we don't have. My home used to be my sanctuary, and now it feels like a prison where I'm being judged by my own blood. Yesterday it all blew up. It was the final straw. She came home from work and stormed into the kitchen where I was preparing dinner for everyone. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask about my day. She just stood there with her hands on her hips and said, "Why didn't you buy any fruit for Grandma?" Just like that. An accusation. In front of my kids, in front of my brother, she had the nerve to confront me, her elder, the woman who has been caring for our mother long before she was even born, about not buying fruit. As if I don't know what my own mother needs. As if I don't spend every waking hour thinking about her comfort. The stipend had to go to her prescription refill this week, something Her Highness wouldn't understand. Fruit was a luxury we couldn't afford right now. But trying to explain that to her is pointless. To her, it's not about money, it's about control. It's about her proving she knows better. I saw red. The disrespect, it was just breathtaking. My husband saw it. My brother saw it. They stood up for me. She needed to be put back in her place. She needed a dose of reality. For all her money and her fancy job, she needed to be reminded of who she is. She's the girl who got pregnant at 19 and came crawling back to us with nothing. So we told her. We reminded her. It was harsh maybe, but it was the truth. You can't just walk all over your family and expect them not to push back. She acts so high and mighty, but she's only living here because we took her in when she had no one else. And that's when the mask finally dropped. All that quiet, humble act she'd been playing for years just vanished, and the real her, the monster she'd been hiding, came out. "You think I need you?" she screamed. Her face was ugly with rage. "I pay for everything. I can walk out of here tomorrow and be fine. Can you say the same? Can any of you say the same?" She threw her money right in our faces. She said it. She finally said what we all knew she was thinking, that we were leeches, that we were nothing without her, that she could leave us all here to suffer and she wouldn't care. It was the cruelest, most hateful thing I have ever heard in my life. She stood there in the middle of our home and declared war on us. She stormed off to her room and slammed the door. We all just stood there, shaking. The air was thick and poison. A few minutes passed. My daughter went to the living room to watch something on the tablet, and my son went to his computer to play his game. Then I heard my daughter cry out, "Mom, the Wi-Fi isn't working." My son looked up from his computer, his face confused. "The internet's gone." We all knew. We knew instantly what she had done. It wasn't a technical problem, it was a punishment. It was a deliberate, calculated move to hurt us, to show us who was really in charge. I walked over to the router and saw the main light blinking orange instead of green. She had gone into her room, logged into the account that she paid for, and cut us off. Just like that. My brother slammed his hand on the table. "That little..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. That was it. The final undeniable proof. This wasn't about helping the family, this was about power. She took away the one thing my children use for their schoolwork, for their entertainment. The one thing we all use to connect to the world outside these four walls. She did it to be cruel. I marched to her bedroom door and banged on it with my fist. Not a polite knock. A hard, angry bang. "Open this door. Right now." Silence. I banged again, harder this time. "Did you hear me? You turn the internet back on. You don't get to do this in our house." The door opened a few inches. She stood there, not even looking scared. She looked calm. It made me even angrier. She wasn't yelling or crying. She just looked at me with those cold, judging eyes. "It's not times our times house, is it?" she said, her voice quiet but sharp as glass. "You all just reminded me of that. And it's not times our times internet. It's my internet. I pay the bill. I decide who uses it." My husband came up behind me. "Don't you talk to your aunt like that," he growled. "You live under our roof." She actually laughed. A short, bitter sound with no happiness in it. "Under times, your time's roof, I pay the electricity that keeps the lights on over this roof. I sometimes pay for the water that comes out of the taps. I buy half the groceries in this house because Mama's stipend doesn't cover it. So don't you dare talk to me about what you provide." Every word was a slap. She was saying it all out loud, laying it all out for everyone to hear. All the things I felt but never wanted to admit. She was turning her help into a list of our failures, reading them out loud right there in the hallway. "We took you in when you had nothing," I shouted, my voice cracking. I was losing control and she was perfectly still. "You were a pregnant child with nowhere to go. Have you forgotten that?" "No," she said, and her eyes finally showed something. It looked like pain, but it was gone in a second. I haven't forgotten, but you seem to have forgotten that I'm not that child anymore. You can't hold that over my head forever. You don't get to treat me like dirt and then use my money to watch your shows." She looked past me at my kids, who were watching from the living room with wide eyes. "I'm sorry," she said to them, "not to us. But this is how it has to be for now." Then she closed the door in my face. Gently. Not a slam, but a soft click that felt louder and more final than any shout. I stood there shaking with a rage so deep I thought I was going to be sick. My husband and my brother were speechless. She had won. With a few quiet words and a changed password, she had taken all the power in the house and left us with nothing. The days that followed were hell. A cold, silent war. The house, which was always filled with noise, the TV, my kids playing games, music, was now horribly quiet. The silence was thick with anger. We didn't speak to her, and she didn't speak to us. She would leave for work in the morning before we were all up and come home late, going straight to her room with her own food. She was living here like a ghost. A ghost who paid the bills. My kids were miserable. They complained constantly. "Mom, I can't do my homework. Mom, I'm so bored. Can't you just ask her to turn it back on?" They didn't understand. They looked at me to fix it, and I couldn't. I was their mother, the one who was supposed to be in charge, and I was powerless. I felt like a failure in their eyes, and it was all her fault. She was poisoning my children against me, making me the bad guy, because I couldn't give them what she so easily took away. We tried to manage. I told my son he could use the library's computer after school. My husband tried to use his phone's data, but it ran out in 2 days. We were completely cut off. It felt like we were living in the dark ages. Every quiet evening was a reminder of what she had done. Every time my daughter sighed with boredom, it was another twist of the knife. The worst part was seeing my mother. Mama didn't understand the details of the fight, but she felt the tension. She would sit in her chair, looking from me to my niece's closed door, her face full of worry. "Why is everyone so angry?" she'd ask in her small voice. And I'd have to say, "It's nothing, Mama, don't you worry." But it was something. It was everything. My niece had shattered our family, and my poor mother was caught in the wreckage. I don't know what happens now. We're living with a stranger who holds all the cards. She proved her point. She proved that we do need her money. Hearing her say it was cruel, but living it is so much worse. She looks at us now on the rare occasions we cross paths in the kitchen, and there's no emotion on her face. It's like she's already moved out in her mind, and she's just waiting for her body to follow. She's not our family anymore. She's a landlord. A resentful one. And we are her tenants trapped in a home that doesn't feel like ours. She thinks she's the victim in all this. I know she does. But she's the one who held a knife to the heart of this family and twisted it. She declared war, and I don't see how any of us can win.
Story 11.
I know what you think of me. I'm the monster in this story, the girl who broke a good man's heart and then years later came back to shatter his family. I've read the comments, I've heard the whispers. I'm the villain. I get it. But before you write me off completely, just let me explain my side. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just maybe a little understanding. My life didn't start the day I met my boyfriend's brother. It started years before that when I met my ex, Alex. I was 19. He was my first everything. First real love, first person I thought I'd spend my life with. Our relationship was like a movie for the first couple of years. We were inseparable, that annoying couple who finished each other's sentences. But 4 years is a lifetime when you're that young. The person I was at 19 wasn't the person I was at 23. I started to feel trapped. Not by him exactly, but by the idea of us. It was this perfect little box everyone had put us in, and I was suffocating inside it. He was talking about rings and white picket fences, and all I could think about was how to get some air. I didn't know how to tell him I was drowning. I didn't have the words or the courage to say, "I love you, but I'm losing myself." He was a good man. He didn't deserve that. So I did something awful instead. I cheated. It wasn't just once. It was a pattern. A secret, ugly part of my life that I kept hidden. It was a cowardly, self-destructive way to sabotage the life I didn't know how to escape. I was desperate for a way out, and instead of walking through the door, I lit the whole house on fire. When he finally found out, the explosion was even worse than I'd imagined. The look on his face is burned into my memory. The shame I felt was suffocating, and I deserved every ounce of it. I had become a person I didn't recognize, someone I hated. The breakup in 2017 wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was rock bottom for me. I spent the next few years picking up the pieces. I went to therapy, a lot of it. I had to take a long, hard look at that girl, the liar, the cheat, and figure out why she did what she did. It wasn't pretty. I learned about my insecurities, my fear of confrontation, my deep-seated need for validation that made me look for it in all the wrong places. It was hard work, painful work, but I did it. I promised myself I would never, ever be that person again. I built a new life, a new career, and a new sense of self-worth that didn't depend on anyone else. 5 years passed. 5 years of being single, of working on myself, of becoming someone I could finally be proud of. Then one night I walked into a bar with some friends, and it felt like the universe was playing a sick joke on me. Across the room I saw him. Not Alex, but his younger brother Liam. He looked so much like Alex, but different too. Softer around the eyes. My first instinct was pure panic. I wanted to turn around and run, pretend I never saw him. But the person I was, now the one I'd worked so hard to become, knew I couldn't. I owed their family an apology that was 5 years overdue. My hands were shaking as I walked over to him. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I tapped him on the shoulder, and when he turned around, he recognized me instantly. The confusion on his face was obvious. Before he could say anything, I just let it all out. "Liam," I said, my voice trembling a little. "I'm so sorry. For everything. For what I did to Alex, for the pain I caused your family. There's no excuse for it, and I've lived with the shame of it every single day. I expected him to tell me to get lost. I expected anger, disgust. I never ever expected what happened next." He just looked at me for a long moment and said, "Thank you for saying that. Do you want to sit down?" We talked for hours. It was the strangest, most comfortable conversation I'd ever had. He didn't look at me like I was a monster. He asked me about my life now, about the therapy. He told me he'd always wondered what happened, that Alex never really talked about it beyond the raw facts. For the first time, I felt like someone saw me, the person I was today, not the ghost of the girl I used to be. We started talking regularly after that. Just text. At first, then calls. We both tried to fight it. We knew it was complicated, a horrible, messy idea, but the connection was real. He was kind and funny and smart, and he saw the good in me that I was still struggling to see in myself. It wasn't about Alex. It was never about Alex. It was about Liam. I fell in love with him genuinely and completely. After 6 months, we knew it was serious. We also knew we couldn't hide it forever. Liam was the one who said he had to tell Alex. It was the only right way to do it. I was terrified. I knew it would be bad, but I held on to a tiny, stupid sliver of hope that maybe after all these years, Alex had moved on enough to see that I had changed. I was wrong. The phone call Liam made to his brother was a catastrophe. According to Liam, Alex went from 0 to 100 in seconds. All the work I'd done, all the progress I'd made was erased in his mind. I was the same manipulative snake I was at 23. He said I was doing this to hurt him, that I had targeted his brother as the ultimate act of revenge. He refused to believe that Liam and I could have genuine feelings for each other. The real fallout started when the holidays got closer. Liam's parents, who I've always adored, invited us for Thanksgiving. They wanted to keep the family together. But Alex gave them an ultimatum. If I was there, he wouldn't be. Suddenly, his parents were forced to choose between their sons. Liam's mom, Sarah, has been incredible. She's called me, talked to me, told me she believes people can change, and that she sees how happy Liam is. But she's being torn apart. The family is fracturing and I'm the fault line. Liam is stuck in the middle, defending me to his brother and defending his brother to me. The guilt is eating me alive. I'm in love with this wonderful man, but our past is a poison that's seeping into everything, destroying the family he loves. A few days ago, Sarah called Liam. The stress was clear in her voice. She told him that she and his dad had been talking for days, trying to find a solution before Christmas became another battlefield. They had finally made a decision about how to handle things. Liam hung up the phone and walked into the living room, his face pale. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" I asked, my stomach twisting into a knot. He took a deep breath. "That was my mom," he said, his voice low. "She wants to meet you for lunch tomorrow. Just you and her." My heart dropped. Just me and her. This wasn't going to be a casual chat over coffee. This was an intervention, a summit, a verdict. All night I replayed every possible scenario in my head. Would she tell me to leave Liam? Would she ask me to skip the holidays indefinitely for the sake of peace? I barely slept, my mind racing with all the ways I could screw this up, all the ways I had already screwed this up. When I met her at the small Italian place she had chosen, my hands were so clammy I kept wiping them on my jeans under the table. Sarah looked tired, but she smiled warmly when I sat down. It was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We made small talk about work, the weather, all the meaningless things you say when you're both avoiding the one thing you need to talk about. Finally, after the waiter brought our drinks, she folded her hands on the table and looked right at me. "I know this is difficult," she started, her voice soft but firm. "And I want you to know I see how happy you make Liam. I truly do. I believe people can change. And I believe you have." I felt a tear prick my eye, and I blinked it back furiously. "Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know." But she continued, and I braced myself. "You have to understand what this looks like from Alex's side. He's not seeing the woman who has spent years in therapy. He's seeing the girl who broke him. And now that girl is with his brother. To him, it feels like a betrayal on two fronts. He feels like his family is choosing you over him." The weight of her words crushed me. "That's the last thing I ever wanted," I whispered. "I know," she said. "Which is why I think there's only one way this gets any better. He needs to see you. He needs to hear it from you. Face to face. I've talked to him. He's agreed to meet you tomorrow afternoon. Just the two of you." She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. It was trembling slightly. "Please. This is tearing my family apart. It's our last shot before Christmas." The thought of facing Alex sent a wave of pure terror through me. The phone call was bad enough. A face-to-face confrontation felt impossible. But looking at his mother, at the desperate hope in her eyes, I knew I had no choice. I had started this fire 5 years ago. I couldn't ask someone else to walk through the flames for me. I knotted my throat too tight to speak. The next day I sat in a quiet corner of a sterile coffee shop, feeling like I was waiting for an execution. My coffee was cold, untouched. I must have checked my phone a dozen times in 5 minutes. When the bell above the door chimed, I looked up, and there he was. Alex. He was thinner than I remembered, with shadows under his eyes I'd never seen before. The easy smile he always used to have was gone, replaced by a tight, hard line. He didn't say hello, just sat down opposite me. For a full minute we just sat in silence. The air was so thick with history and anger I could barely breathe. "What do you want?" he finally said, his voice cold and flat. "I wanted to apologize, Alex," I began, my own voice shaking. "In person. For what I did to you all those years ago. It was cruel and cowardly, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't regret the pain I caused you. I was a different person then. A broken person." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "A different person? It looks to me like you're doing the exact same thing. Finding the one person you know will hurt me the most and sinking your claws into them? Is this some kind of sick game for you?" "No," the word came out louder than I intended. "No, it was never like that. I saw him at a bar by chance. I only went over to apologize for what I did to you. I never expected this. I tried to stop it. We both did. But I fell in love with him, Alex. It has nothing to do with you." "Nothing to do with me," he shot back, leaning forward. His eyes were blazing now. "You destroyed my ability to trust people. You made me question everything. And now you're sitting at my parents' dinner table. You're going to be in our family Christmas photo. How can it have times nothing, times to do with me?" I had no answer for that. He was right. Every point was a dagger, and it was true. All I could do was sit there and take it. "You have every right to hate me," I said quietly. "I get it. I really do. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not even asking you to like me. I'm just asking you to believe that I love your brother, and that I would never ever hurt him. The pain I'm causing your family right now is unbearable. If there was a way to love him without causing all this damage, I would take it. But there isn't." He stared at me, his jaw clenched. I could see the war going on behind his eyes, the old hurt, the new anger, the love for his brother. He was silent for a long time, just watching me, as if he was trying to see through all the layers and find the girl he used to know. Finally, he stood up. "I'll never forgive you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Don't ever expect me to. But my brother is a grown man. If this is what he wants..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Just don't break him like you broke me, because I won't let you do it twice." And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving me alone at the table, shaking. I cried the whole way back to my apartment. When Liam opened the door, I just fell into his arms. I told him everything Alex said, every painful true word. He just held me, stroking my hair, letting me get it all out. He wasn't angry at his brother. He was just sad for everyone involved. Later that evening, Sarah called. Alex had spoken to her. He told her he was coming to Christmas. He wouldn't talk to me, he wouldn't acknowledge me, but he would be there. He wasn't going to make his parents choose anymore. It wasn't a victory, not really. It was a ceasefire. A cold, bitter truce held together by the love everyone in that family had for each other, a love that I was now precariously attached to. So here I am. Christmas is next week. I'm going to my boyfriend's family home, and his brother, my ex, will be there. I'm not the monster of the story anymore, but I'm not the hero either. I'm a ghost at the feast. A reminder of a past that everyone is trying to move on from. Redemption isn't a single moment of forgiveness. It's not about someone else telling you that you're a good person now. I've learned it's about showing up every day and living with the consequences of who you used to be. I broke this family in a way. And now my penance is to sit in the broken home I created with the man I love, and hope that over time my presence can help patch the cracks, instead of shattering the whole thing all over again.
Story 12.
I know what he told you. I'm sure he painted a picture of a cold, cheating wife who planned to steal his kids and run off with some guy overseas. He's good at telling stories. He's been telling them our whole marriage, shaping our lives into the story he wanted to live. I was just a character in it. For 15 years, my name was basically Navy wife and mom. And I'm not saying I didn't love my kids, they're my entire world, but I was never just times me, asterisk. It all started with him joining the Navy. It was his grand gesture, you see. He did it for us so he could support the family, and I wouldn't have to worry. What it really meant was that his career would always come first. We moved when the Navy said move. Our lives were dictated by his deployment schedule. My job was to keep the house running and the kids happy, a perfect little support system for his big, important career. He was proud of putting me through school while he was in. But it was never about what I wanted. It was about what was practical. A certificate here, an associate's degree there. Things I could do online or at night, things that would never turn into a real career that might interfere with his. He was curating my life, building the perfect wife he had in mind. I was his project. When he was getting ready to retire, the dynamic shifted. Suddenly it was my turn. He pushed me to get a real job to contribute. He was the one who found the officer program in the Navy Reserves. He thought it was perfect. I'd have a respectable career, good benefits, and it was a world he understood. It was still under his influence in a way. But then a funny thing happened. I was good at it. Really good. For the first time in my adult life, I had an identity that wasn't tied to him. I wasn't just someone's wife or someone's mom. I was an officer. People listened to me because of my skills, not because of who my husband was. That feeling, It was like breathing for the first time after being underwater for a decade. The validation was intoxicating. And when the opportunity came up for a multi-year post overseas, I knew I had to take it. It was my chance to finally be a whole person. Of course, he wasn't thrilled. We had 3 kids. It was a huge change. We talked about it for weeks. He finally agreed, but there was a catch. The open relationship. It sounds so modern and progressive, doesn't it? But it wasn't. It was the most cynical thing he'd ever said to me. He sat me down and said, "I figure you'll do it anyway, so we might as well just be open about it." It wasn't permission. It was an accusation. It was him telling me he already expected me to fail to betray him. He wasn't giving me freedom. He was preemptively managing my screw-up. He'd already decided what kind of woman I was. Overseas, everything changed. I wasn't living in my husband's shadow. I was respected for my work. And that's where I met him. He was a superior officer, and at first it was purely professional. But he saw times me, asterisk. Not the wife, not the mother, just me. He saw my ambition, and he didn't think it was a threat. He thought it was impressive. We'd talk for hours about work, about our goals, about life. It was a relationship between peers, something I'd never truly had. It felt like a lifeline in the middle of an ocean of loneliness. It grew into something more, and for the first time I felt like I was in a partnership, not a project. My marriage was falling apart. I knew it. Every call home was a reminder of the life I was suffocating in. The guilt was eating me alive, but so was the misery. I confided in a friend back home, someone I thought I could trust. I was a mess. I'd be on the phone with her, crying, just trying to figure out what to do. You know how you talk when you feel completely trapped. You throw out desperate hypotheticals. What if I just didn't go back? What if I could file for divorce from here? What if I could just have the kids with me, have my career, and be free from his control? It wasn't a plan. It was a fantasy. It was me at my lowest point, dreaming of a way out, any way out. It was a tearful, desperate brainstorming session with a friend. I never ever imagined she would take those words, strip them of all their pain and desperation, and present them to my husband as a cold, calculated plot. She betrayed me. She handed him a weapon, and he was more than happy to use it. The phone call was terrifying. He didn't sound heartbroken. He sounded furious. It was the rage of a man who had discovered his prized possession was no longer in its box. He wasn't crying because he missed me. He was screaming because he had lost control. His demands were immediate and absolute. I had to end it with my colleague, effective immediately. I had to block him on everything. I had to erase every trace of the one person who had made me feel seen. There was no discussion. It was an order. I was a subordinate who had stepped out of line, and he was putting me back in my place. Scared out of my mind, I agreed to everything. I ended it. But blocking a superior officer on professional networking sites isn't like blocking an ex on Facebook. It's a statement. It's awkward and raises questions I couldn't afford to answer. I was trying to figure out how to navigate it, how to cut ties personally without committing career suicide. I just needed a day or two to handle it delicately. But he didn't give me a day. He was watching. He checked my social media and saw he was still listed as a connection. He didn't see my fear or my professional dilemma. he only saw defiance. My phone rang again. It was him, and the tone in his voice this time, it was different. The rage was gone, replaced by something much, much colder. He had his proof. He had the justification he needed to burn my entire world to the ground. He told me he had called our daughter into the room. He said he was going to tell her everything. I begged him not to. She was just a kid. But he did it anyway. Later, I heard the full story. He apparently collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, clutching her, and telling her that Mommy had a new boyfriend and was planning to leave them all forever. He put on the performance of a lifetime, a dramatic, heartbreaking show designed for one purpose: to poison my children against me. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He wasn't just trying to hurt me. He was salting the earth, making sure nothing good could ever grow between me and my kids again. Then he laid out his final threat. It was no longer just about me. He told me he had my colleague's full name, his wife's name, and his command's contact information. He said if I didn't sign a legal document he was having drawn up, he would go nuclear. He would report our relationship to his command, which would end his career instantly. He would call his wife and tell her everything. He would destroy this man's entire life, his marriage, his family, his 2 decades of service, all to punish me. It was a brutal display of power. He was showing me that his reach was long, and he wasn't afraid to ruin other people to get what he wanted. He was forcing me back into the box I had tried so hard to climb out of. I was trapped. Completely and utterly trapped. He held everything hostage. My career, which was just starting. My colleague's life, which I never wanted to damage. And most importantly, my children's love, which he was actively turning into hate. What was I supposed to do? Fight him from thousands of miles away while he was in the house with them, whispering his version of the story into their ears every night? A few days later, a document arrived by email. It was a post-nuptial agreement. It was simple and brutal. It stipulated that in the event of a divorce, he would get full custody of the children. He would get the house. He would get everything. My signature on that paper was the price of his silence. The price to save my colleague's career. The price to stop my husband's campaign of poison against me with my own kids. I signed it. I signed it under the most extreme duress I have ever known. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was in a panic, just trying to make the threats stop. In my terrified mind, signing it was like hitting the pause button on a disaster. I thought it would de-escalate the situation. I thought it would calm him down, show him I was behaving. I thought it would buy me time. Time to finish my tour, to come home to talk to him like a rational human being, and work out a real fair plan for our family. I truly believe that no court would ever enforce a document signed under such obvious coercion. I never, not for a second, thought he would actually use it. I thought it was just his ultimate power move, a trophy of his victory over me. I was so wrong. I came home a year later, ready to try and salvage what was left of my family. I suggested counseling. I tried to talk about co-parenting. I wanted to find a way forward where we could both be in our children's lives. He just smiled. He waited until I was settled back in, and then he filed for divorce, and with it he filed the agreement I had signed. That piece of paper, my signature, scrawled on it in a moment of pure terror, became an unbreakable weapon. He used it to take my children. He told the court I had abandoned them, that I had signed them over willingly so I could run off and be with my lover. He used my friend's betrayal and my own desperate words as proof of a long-concocted plan. He twisted my desperation into malice. He painted my attempt to find myself as a plot to destroy him. I know I made mistakes. I hurt him and I hurt my family, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. I was clumsy and I was selfish. But my story isn't about a villain who wanted to steal her kids. It's about a woman who was suffocating and tried to find a window to get some air. I was just fantasizing about what it might feel like to breathe. And he used that fantasy to lock me in a cage and take away the only thing that ever mattered to me. He didn't just win. He burned my whole world down to make sure I knew I had lost.
Story 13.
I saw what my husband wrote about me. I guess it's my turn. He painted a picture of a crazy, insecure wife who blew up our marriage over a silly experiment. The truth is, our marriage was already dead. He was just the last one to notice. For the first 6 years, we were a unit. We were that comfortable couple who orders pizza on a Tuesday and gains the same 10 pounds over the holidays. We had our first child, then our second, and we were in the trenches together. Then our son was born, and something in my husband just broke. He found the gym. And I don't mean he started going to the gym. I mean he times it like a religion. At first I was so proud. I loved that he was getting healthy and had a new hobby. I tried to make it our thing. I bought new workout clothes and went with him a few times, but I was clumsy and tired. I was still recovering from a difficult birth, and I just couldn't keep up. So I stopped. And that's when it became times his times world, and I became a problem he needed to fix. Every single conversation became about my diet or my sedentary lifestyle. He'd watch me eat a piece of toast and say something like, "You know that's just empty carbs." He wasn't trying to be mean. He genuinely thought he was helping. That was the worst part. He'd wrap his insults in concern. He'd say things like, "I'll love you no matter what size you are," but the tone was clear. I am a good man for putting up with you. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his before and after picture that never got to the after. He was the star of this new life he was building, getting leaner and stronger every day, and I was just the frumpy mom he came home to. The breaking point was that dumb Instagram comment. He's right, I never thought he was cheating. But he posted a photo of himself lifting a crazy amount of weight, and the comments were all from his new gym friends. "Looking strong, bro, killing it," and then one from a woman. "Beast mode, you're an inspiration." When I saw it, my heart just sank. It was a stupid, tiny thing, but it was proof. Proof that he had this whole other life with this whole other group of people who saw him as this amazing, powerful man. And where was I? I was at home, covered in baby spit-up, feeling like I was shrinking while he was growing. I tried to explain it to him that night. I told him I felt left out, that I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. He didn't get it. He just got defensive, pulling up her profile to show me she was married. He completely missed the point. The point wasn't her. The point was that he was building a kingdom and I wasn't even allowed in the gates. That's when he came up with his brilliant idea. He was sitting on the edge of the bed with a smug, patient look on his face, like a therapist talking to a difficult child. He said we should both make Tinder profiles. Just as an experiment. A confidence boost. for me. He was so sure of himself. So sure that this grand gesture would prove I was still desirable and finally shut me up about my insecurities. It was the most condescending thing anyone has ever said to me. But I said yes. I felt like if I said no, I'd be proving his point, that I was weak and scared. We downloaded the app, paid for Tinder Gold, and set our location to London so no one we knew would see us. He was laughing, making jokes about it. For him, this was a fun little game. For me, it felt like I was about to be graded on my own worth. We put a movie on, and for 2 hours I just stared at the screen, a knot of ice in my stomach. Then the time was up. He checked his phone first. "Huh," he said, "only one." Then I unlocked mine. My screen lit up like a Christmas tree. It was vibrating non-stop. Notifications were flooding in. 330 likes. More than 330. It just kept climbing. I opened the app and it was a sea of faces, men from all over the world. Doctors, lawyers, artists, guys who looked like they belonged on the cover of a magazine, and they all saw my picture and swiped right. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a mom. I didn't feel like a wife. I felt like a woman. A woman that people times wanted asterisk. We sat there on the bed and scrolled through my phone together. I watched the smug little smile fade from his face. The giggly fun mood was gone. He was just quiet, staring at the screen. I saw him swallow hard as a message popped up from a banker in Dubai telling me my smile was incredible. Then he showed me his one match. She was not at all the type of woman he usually finds attractive. And a sound came out of me that I hadn't made in years. I laughed. A real, deep, cruel laugh. I couldn't help it. The dam of all my resentment just broke. I looked him right in the eye, put on my sweetest, most patronizing voice, and said, "Aw, at least I still want you, honey." That was it. That was the moment I saw it. The power in our marriage didn't just shift, it flipped upside down. He had opened this door to prove a point, and now he was terrified of what he'd let in. We both deleted our accounts that night and went to bed without saying another word. But it was too late. The next day, at work, I couldn't focus. All I could think about was that feeling. That buzz of being seen. Was it real or just a fluke I had to know? I pulled out my work laptop, opened a private browser, and typed in the one word that I knew could ruin my life. Or maybe, just maybe, save it, Tinder. It wasn't a fluke. The likes and messages came pouring in again, even faster this time. I made a new profile, one that didn't mention being married or having kids. I used a picture from a few years ago before the baby weight really settled in. I just wanted to see. I told myself it was for science. My own little experiment. It quickly became more than that. It became my secret world. During my lunch break, while the kids were asleep, whenever I had a spare 5 minutes, I was on my laptop living this other life. I was talking to a lawyer in New York who loved my sense of humor. A musician in Berlin who wanted to know all about my day. It was intoxicating. For the first time in years, men were interested in my mind before they even knew about my body. They asked questions. They listened. They weren't trying to fix me. My two best friends, Sarah and Chloe, were my cheerleaders. They'd both gotten out of bad marriages and were thriving. When I finally confessed to them what I was doing, they didn't judge me. They poured me a huge glass of wine and said, "It's about damn time." They told me I deserved to feel wanted. They said my husband had spent years making me feel small, and if this was what it took to feel big again, then I shouldn't feel an ounce of guilt. Their support was like a permission slip. The conversation started to change. The compliments about my smile turned into compliments about my body. The questions about my day turned into questions about what I was wearing. And I leaned into it. I sent pictures, nothing with my face, but pictures that made me feel powerful and sexy. Receiving their replies, seeing how desired I was, felt like a drug. It was a fantasy, I knew that. But my real life had become so bleak that a fantasy was the only thing keeping me afloat. The intimacy with my husband was completely gone. Every time he touched me, it felt like an obligation. Like he was doing his husbandly duty, checking a box. The pity in his eyes was gone, replaced by a nervous confusion, which was almost worse. He was walking on eggshells around me, and, honestly, I liked it. He found out on a Tuesday night. I was on the couch with my laptop, smiling at a message from the guy in New York. My husband came into the room and asked what I was looking at. I quickly closed the laptop, but not before he saw the distinctive orange flame of the Tinder logo. His face just crumpled. "Are you serious?" he whispered. "After everything, you're still on that thing." This was it. The moment I'd been both dreading and craving. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. I just looked at him. "You opened the door, not me," I said, my voice steady. "You ran an experiment to see if I was still desirable. Well, congratulations. The results are in. I am." He started pacing, running his hands through his hair. "This isn't about that. This is about you lying to me, going behind my back, talking to other men." "And what about you?" I shot back, standing up. "What about you spending years making me feel like garbage, like a project you had to work on? You can't just break someone's self-esteem and then get angry when they find a way to build it back up." By cheating, he yelled, "This is how you fix things. By sexting strangers." "I haven't done anything, not really," I said, and it was true. It was all just words and pictures on a screen. But maybe we should. Both of us. He stopped pacing and stared at me, confused. "What are you talking about?" And that's when I said it. "I think we should have an open marriage." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and cold. I tried to explain it. I told him he was the one who was obsessed with looks, with the gym, with all those fit women who admired him. I was giving him a pass, a way for us to both get what we wanted without the lies. I was trying to make it sound like a logical, modern solution. But he saw right through it. He just shook his head, a look of complete and utter defeat on his face. "So, this is it," he said, his voice cracking. "This is how you end it. Not by leaving, but by trying to turn our marriage into some kind of free-for-all." He looked at me like he'd never seen me before. "I don't even know who you are anymore." "I'm the woman you created," I told him. And I meant it. We've been living in a state of limbo ever since. He sleeps in the guest room. We're polite for the kids, like two co-workers who can't stand each other but have to finish a project. The power is all mine now, but the victory feels hollow. The confident, smug man I married is gone, replaced by a sad, quiet ghost who barely looks at me. Some days I miss the man he used to be, the one who would get winded walking up the stairs with me. But then I remember the feeling of his judgment, the weight of his disappointment, and I don't feel guilty anymore. He wanted to prove I was still desirable. He thought it would be a quick fix, a little ego boost that would make me quiet and compliant again. He thought he could control the outcome. But he didn't realize that you can't show someone a world of warmth and light and then expect them to willingly walk back into the cold. He started the fire, and now he's angry that our house is burning down. Maybe it needed to. Maybe sometimes you have to burn everything to the ground to see the sky again.
Story 14.
I know what you all think of me. I'm the wedding planner who almost ruined a bride's big day. The incompetent, unprofessional mess who got fired a week before the wedding. I've seen the comments. I've heard the whispers. My business is probably finished, and honestly, maybe it should be. But I just want to explain my side. Not for forgiveness, just for a second of understanding. Before all this, I was sober. I had been for years. I had built a business from nothing, one that I was proud of. Then the pandemic hit. It was like watching my entire life's work get washed away in slow motion. Every cancellation call felt like a punch to the gut. The savings drained, the phone stopped ringing, and the silence in my apartment got louder and louder. That old familiar screaming in my head started up again. A tiny voice that said times, "You're not good enough, you're going to fail, you're a fraud." Asterisks. I started small. A pill to help me sleep. Just one. Then another to stop my hands from shaking in the morning. I told myself it was temporary. I was just managing the stress until things got back to normal. When this bride, Sarah, hired me, it felt like a lifeline. It was my first big wedding since the world fell apart. I needed it. Not just the money, but the feeling of being useful again. The feeling that I could still do this, that I hadn't completely lost my touch. We had the site meeting in June. Sarah was sweet, but you could tell her mind was a million miles away. Her sister had just gotten a terrible diagnosis, and she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Then the florist walked in. Let's call her Anna. Anna wasn't just a florist. She was a local legend, and she knew it. She walked into that venue like she owned it, talking down to the staff and making little comments about how she was squeezing us into her impossibly busy schedule. Every word out of her mouth made me feel smaller. She talked about her flowers like they were precious artifacts, about how her costs were non-negotiable, about how her art was perishable. I felt like I was back in high school, facing down the popular girl who had decided I wasn't cool enough. The old shame started creeping up my spine. When her proposal came in, it was insane. The price was astronomical, and there was zero room for changes. I saw Sarah's face fall. With her sister's medical bills, this was a huge stretch. I put my hand on her arm and said the words I would come to regret. Don't worry. We'll figure it out. That's my job. But I wasn't figuring anything out. My days became a blurry mess of anxiety and pills. I wasn't sleeping right. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, convinced I'd forgotten something critical. Sarah was understandably completely consumed by her family crisis. She'd cancel meetings at the last minute or just text me, "I trust you. Just handle it. Pick something beautiful." It was a planner's dream and an addict's nightmare. Total control with no one checking my work. The perfect environment for me to fall apart in private. On September 1st, Sarah's fiancé Mark met me for coffee and handed me a stack of checks for the vendors. They were all there, clipped together in a neat little pile. Looking at them, I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. I can still fix this, I thought. I can pay everyone, get everything locked in, and pull this off. It was a second chance. I put the checks into the main pocket of my leather client binder, the one I take with me everywhere. I got home and started addressing the envelopes. The caterer, the DJ, the photographer, the venue, and then I got to the florist. I reached into the binder pocket and my fingers found nothing. Panic hit me like a physical blow. A cold, sharp dread that stole the air from my lungs. I emptied the binder, shaking it out. Nothing. I tore my office apart. I went through every file, every drawer, every pile of paper. I searched my car, pulling up the floor mats, digging under the seats. I went through my house like a tornado. The check was just gone. How do you call a bride who is sitting by her sister's hospital bed and tell her you lost a check for thousands of dollars? How do you admit that kind of screw-up? And more than that, how could I possibly call times Anna times I? Could already hear the condescending tone in her voice. See the look of disgust on her face. She already thought I was a joke. This would just prove it. So I did the worst thing possible. I did nothing. I told myself it would turn up, that I must have put it somewhere safe and just forgotten. When days passed and it didn't, I created a new plan. I'd wait for my next client payment to come in and I'd just pay her myself. I'd write a check from my own business account and no one would ever have to know. I could still fix this. I just needed a little more time. Anna started emailing. At first they were polite. Hi, just following up on the contract and deposit. I ignored them. Then they got a little more pointed. Hi, I need the deposit by the end of this week to hold your date. I let that one sit in my inbox, a glowing red mark of my failure. I was playing a stupid, desperate game of chicken, praying for a miracle. Every morning I woke up with a knot of dread in my stomach, and every night I took something to knock myself out so I wouldn't have to think about it. I was living on a knife's edge, and I knew it couldn't last. The wedding was getting closer and closer. My whole body was buzzing with a constant low-level panic. Then, exactly 1 week before the wedding, my phone lit up. It was a text from Sarah. My heart stopped. I knew before I even read it that it was over. Her message was simple. Hey, just spoke to Anna to confirm the flower delivery times. She said she was never booked. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can we all hop on a quick Zoom call to sort it out? That text message sat on my screen, a glowing little bomb. My first thought was a stupid, childish one, times I can just not answer asterisk. I could throw my phone in the river and disappear. But I'm an adult. I'm a business owner. So I took a pill to steady my hands and typed back, of course, send me a link. The half hour before the call was the longest of my life. I put on a nice blouse, did my makeup, and tried to look like the capable professional I was pretending to be. I rehearsed my lines. It was a simple miscommunication. A dropped ball. An oversight in her office. I could spin this. I had to spin this. When I logged into the Zoom, their faces popped up 2 little boxes of judgment. Sarah looked tired and worried, her brow furrowed. Anna looked perfect. She had on bright red lipstick and her hair was immaculate. She held a big mug of coffee in both hands and smiled a tight, sharp little smile. She was ready for war. I started first trying to control the narrative. "Sarah, Anna, thanks for hopping on. I'm so sorry for the confusion. It looks like there was an administrative oversight on our end, Anna. I have the payment right here ready to go. We just need to get the contract finalized." I tried to sound breezy and in control, like this was a boring piece of paperwork we just had to get through. Anna just stared at me. She took a slow sip of her coffee. Then she let out a small, sharp laugh. It wasn't a friendly sound. "An oversight, is that what we're calling it?" My blood ran cold. "I've been emailing you for almost 2 months," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "My office manager has called you. You don't book a florist of my caliber with a week to go and call it an oversight. That's not how this works." I saw Sarah's eyes dart between us. I had to try again. "I understand your frustration, Anna, but my focus has been entirely on Sarah and her family situation. Things have been chaotic. I was simply waiting for the final go-ahead." That's when Anna put her mug down. She leaned into the camera and her smile was gone. "You know, I asked around about you after our meeting in June. The name sounded familiar. And then I remembered the wedding at the Grand Hotel a few years back. The bride with cancer." I stopped breathing. It felt like she'd punched me through the screen. That was my lowest point before I got sober the first time. A mistake that has haunted my nightmares for years. "You forgot to book the transportation for her entire family," Anna said, her eyes locked on mine. She wasn't even looking at Sarah anymore. This was for me. They were all flying in to see her get married before she started chemo, and they were stranded at the airport. All because you were, what was the word they used, disorganized. Unresponsive. I couldn't speak. My throat was closed tight. All I could see was Sarah's face in the other box, her expression slowly crumbling as she understood. This wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern. So don't you dare sit there in your pretty blouse and tell me this was an oversight. Anna spat. "You are incompetent. And I will personally make sure that every vendor, every venue, and every future bride in this city knows my name and knows to never, ever work with yours." That was it. The kill shot. I looked at Sarah. Tears were silently rolling down her cheeks. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through everything. "You're fired," she said to me. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and then turned to Anna. "Can you help me, please? I'll pay whatever you want." I didn't wait to hear Anna's triumphant reply. I just moved my mouse and clicked "Leave meeting." The screen went blank, showing only my own reflection. A pale, sweaty woman with dead eyes. I sat there for I don't know how long. An hour. 2. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I finally stood up, feeling numb, and started to clear my desk. I picked up my leather binder, the source of all this misery. I was going to throw it in the trash, but as I held it, my thumb pressed against the side and felt a strange lump. A thickness in the leather that shouldn't have been there. My heart started pounding again, but for a different reason. I fumbled with the lining, prying it away from the leather, and there it was. the check. It had slipped through a tiny tear in the fabric of the inner pocket and was lodged deep inside the cover itself. I just stared at it. All this time, all this lying, all this panic, all this destruction, and it was right here. I started to laugh a horrible choked sound. It was the cruelest joke in the world. I took a picture of it with my phone and sent it to Sarah. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. Asterisk. I am so sorry. I found the check. I was just so embarrassed that I lost it and I didn't know how to tell you. I know it's no excuse. Asterisk. It was the truth. But it was the smallest, most pathetic piece of the truth. How could I explain the rest? That the shame was so huge because it was tied to a bigger, uglier secret, that I was so terrified of being seen as a failure that I guaranteed my own failure, that I wasn't just hiding a lost check, I was hiding a lost life. She never texted back. I know what they say about me now. Anna made good on her promise. The story is everywhere in the local wedding community. I'm the planner who lied, who ghosted, who almost ruined a wedding for a poor bride who was already going through hell. They're right. I did all of those things. I am a terrible wedding planner. But I'm also a person who was dangling by a thread and then the thread snapped. I fell and I'm still falling. And I don't know if I'll ever get back up.